The evening comes without hurry to the mountain temple. It arrives as a slow dimming of the light that already filters through layers of cloud, a gradual turning of the air from pale grey to a deeper shade of slate. You have watched this change many times, from many seasons, but it never feels sudden. The temple stands on a ridge between two higher peaks, its wooden halls and tiled roofs clinging to a leveled shelf of rock that drops away into forest on three sides. Above you, the sky is a single mass of cloud moving in from the eastern valley, heavy with moisture that has traveled for days across lowlands and foothills. The wind is still gentle at this hour, just enough to stir the highest branches of the old pines below the eastern terrace and bring the first cool smell of coming rain through the open corridors. You begin your evening gate check at the west wall because that is where you always begin. The habit is old and rests in your body like a well-worn path. You rise from the wooden stool in the small gatehouse room where you had been mending a torn carrying cloth, place the needle back into its cloth case, and step out into the covered walkway that runs along the inner side of the outer wall. The boards beneath your cloth slippers are dark with age and polished smooth by generations of feet. They make no sound beyond the soft creak that is as familiar to you as your own breathing. To your left, the wall rises to shoulder height. Its stones fitted together without mortar, each one chosen long ago from the mountain slopes and shaped just enough to sit tight against its neighbors. To your right, the open courtyard is already deep in shadow, the pebble-strewn ground giving way to a moss garden around the central well. You walk west along the covered passage until you reach the first set of wooden shutters that close off the arrow-slit windows facing the valley. These shutters are simple panels of cedar wood, each hung on two iron hinges and held open during the day by a hook on the outer wall. You slide the hook free with your right hand while your left hand supports the weight of the shutter, feeling the smooth grain that time and weather have carved into shallow ridges. The shutter comes toward you without resistance, the hinges turning with the quiet sound of metal on metal that the rain will soon silence. You press it flat against the stone frame, slide the wooden latch pin down through the iron bracket, and test it once with a gentle pull. It does not move. Satisfied, you move to the next window 3 paces farther along the wall, your hand already reaching for the hook. The light continues to fade as you work your way along the west wall. There are 7 windows here, each identical to the one before, each requiring the same 4 motions: release the hook, draw the shutter closed, slide the latch pin, test the fit. You do not count them as you go, but your hands know the number. Between the 4th and 5th windows you pause because a gust of wind comes up the valley and rattles a loose board somewhere above you. You look up at the eaves but see nothing amiss, only the dark underside of the roof tiles and a spider's web trembling in the corner. The web is empty, its maker long gone or hidden from the coming weather. You resume your work, closing the 5th shutter, then the 6th and the 7th, each motion flowing into the next without hurry or delay. When the last latch is tested, you stand still for a moment and listen to the forest below. The pines are whispering now, their needles brushing together in a sound like a distant waterfall, and the first true raindrop strikes the curved tile above your head with a small, sharp tap. The rain begins properly as you turn the corner and start along the south wall. It does not arrive all at once, but in scattered drops that hit the tiles above you in an uneven rhythm. First 1, then a pause, then 3 in quick succession, then a longer pause filled with the sound of the wind. You pull your sleeves down over your wrists, not because the cold is sharp, but because the damp air settles into the fabric of your robe and makes it cling slightly to your forearms. The south wall looks out over the steepest part of the ridge, where the rock falls away almost vertically into a gorge so deep that you can only see its far side when the air is clear. Tonight the odds, no far side. Only a gathering of mist that rises from the gorge like steam from a cooking pot, white against the dark stone, slow and thick. You watch it for a moment without thinking anything in particular, then turn your attention back to the shutters. There are 5 windows along the south wall, wider than those on the west, because they face the softer weather that comes with the turning of the seasons. The first shutter is already half closed, left that way by someone earlier in the day, perhaps the young novice who sweeps the courtyard each morning. You take hold of its edge and pull it gently toward you. noticing the way the light from the distant sky catches the grain of the wood, a faint sheen that will soon disappear into full darkness. The latch on this one is a little stiff, its iron pin having gathered a thin coating of rust during the humid summer months. You work it back and forth a few times with a patient rhythm until the rust crumbles away and the pin slides smoothly into place. You test it once, find it secure, and move to the next. By the time you reach the third window of the south wall, the rain is falling steadily. The drops no longer come one by one, but in a constant low drumming on the roof tiles, a sound that fills the covered passage and wraps around you like a thick blanket. Water begins to trickle down the outer face of the wall, finding its way through the gaps between stones and forming dark streaks that catch what little light remains. You close the third shutter and the fourth, each one bringing a small increase in the darkness of the corridor, until by the fifth the passage behind you is almost entirely black. You do not need to see to close the last shutter because your hands know its shape. The slight warp in the lower left corner, the way the latch bracket is set a finger's width lower than the others. You close it, secure it, test it, and then stand for a long quiet moment with your palms still resting against the wood, feeling the vibration of the rain transmitted through the shutter from the outer air. The east wall is the longest and houses the main gate. You leave the south passage and cross the corner of the courtyard, stepping out from under the cover of the eaves into the open rain for just a few paces. The drops strike your shaved head and your shoulders with a soft insistence. Cool, but not unpleasant, each one a tiny point of contact that reminds you of the physical world beyond your thoughts. You do not hurry across the open space because there is no need to hurry, no danger in getting wet, no task waiting that cannot wait a little longer. The pebbles under your slippers are dark with water, and they shift slightly with each step, a familiar sensation that you have felt in this same spot through spring rains and autumn drizzles and the occasional summer downpour. You reach the covered passage on the far side and pause under the eaves to brush the water from your sleeves with a simple flick of each wrist, then continue toward the gate. The main gate is a double door of thick cypress wood set into the stone wall at the eastern end of the temple compound. It is taller than a person and wide enough for two to walk through side by side, though no one has walked through it in many days. The temple is remote, visited only rarely by pilgrims who make the long climb up the mountain path, and tonight the path is empty, lost in mist and rain and gathering darkness. You approach the gate and first check the great horizontal beam that rests across the doors on the inner side. This beam is a single piece of hardwood longer than your outstretched arms, its ends fitting into iron brackets on either side of the doorframe. You place both hands under its center and lift just slightly, not to move it, but to confirm that it sits snug in its brackets, that no settling of the wall or warping of the wood has loosened its hold. It does not shift. It is as solid as the mountain itself. Next you check the smaller side door set into the right-hand leaf of the main gate. This is the door you use when you need to step outside the walls, to gather kindling or sweep the outer steps, or simply to look at the sky from beyond the shadow of the roof. It has its own latch, a simple iron hook that falls into an eye, and a wooden bolt that slides horizontally into the doorframe. You push the bolt home with your thumb, feeling the slight resistance of the wood as it enters the socket, and then hook the latch into place. You test the door with a gentle push at shoulder height. It rattles once against its frame, but holds firm. You push again a little lower, where the wood is thinner, and again it holds. Satisfied, you turn from the gate and begin the short walk back along the east wall toward the north passage. The rain intensifies as you walk, shifting from a steady drumming to a fuller roar that makes the roof tiles vibrate above you. The sound fills the covered passage so completely that you can no longer hear your own footsteps or the rustle of your robe. It is a clean sound, a simple sound, the sound of water falling from a great height onto hard surfaces, and it has no pattern that you need to follow, no rhythm that demands a response. You stop midway along the east wall and look out through a gap in the tiles where the roof does not quite meet the top of the wall. Through this gap you can see the courtyard, now a dark expanse of wet stones and glistening moss, and beyond it the warm orange glow of the lantern that burns always in the main hall. The light is small and steady, a single point of warmth in the deepening blue of the evening, and it tells you that everything inside the hall is as it should be, that the incense burner is still lit, that the floor cushions are dry, that the Buddha images sit in their calm rows facing the door. You resume your walk and come to the north wall, the last section of your circuit. The north wall is the shortest, only 4 windows, and it looks out not over a valley or a gorge, but up the slope of the mountain itself, toward the higher peak that rises behind the temple. The forest there is thicker, older, the trees growing close together with trunks wrapped in moss and branches tangled with ancient vines. The rain here sounds different because it falls not only on the roof tiles, but also on the broad leaves of the slope, a layered sound of many small impacts that merge into a continuous whisper. You close the first north shutter, and the wind pushes back against your hand, a sudden gust that tries to tear the shutter from your grip. You hold it steady without alarm, wait for the gust to pass, and then guide it gently into its frame. The latch on this one is newer than the others, replaced after the winter storms 3 years ago, and it slides into place with a satisfying click that you feel through your fingertips. The second shutter is unremarkable, closing as easily as the first. The third has a small crack in its lower panel, a crack you have known about for many months, and you pause to run your finger along its length, checking whether the damp has made it wider. It has not. The wood is wet, but its dimensions are unchanged, the crack no larger than a thread. You close the shutter, secure the latch, and move to the fourth, the last of the night. This final window looks out directly onto the steep path that leads up the mountain to the small shrine near the summit. The path is invisible now, lost in cloud and rain and the near-total darkness of the early night, but you know it is there in the same way you know the shutters are closed and the gate is barred. You draw the last shutter toward you, feeling its familiar weight, and as it closes, you see for a final instant the faint outline of the higher peak against the slightly less dark sky, a shape of deeper black within black, before the wood meets stone and the world outside is shut away. You stand at the corner where the north wall meets the west wall, completing the circuit. All 23 shutters are closed. The side door is bolted. The main gate beam rests firm in its brackets. The outer walls are sealed against the storm. You feel no particular pride in this, no sense of accomplishment, because it is simply what you do each evening when the light fails and the rain begins. It is a task that belongs to the temple and to the mountain and to the long line of monks who have stood in this same spot, listening to this same rain, their hands still tingling from the touch of cold iron and wet wood. You do not return immediately to the inner buildings. Instead, you walk back along the west passage to the gatehouse room where you began, drawn by the thought of the small clay cup that sits on the shelf beside your stool, the one you use for the evening tea you have not yet prepared. The room is a simple space, barely larger than a storage closet, with a wooden bench against one wall and a shelf on the other holding a few tools, a mallet for driving pegs, a coil of hemp rope, a spare lantern with a cracked glass pane. You sit down on the bench, the wood creaking under your weight, and let your hands rest on your knees. Through the open doorway, you watch the rain falling into the courtyard, silver streaks in the dim light of the distant main hall. Lantern, each drop a brief line drawn from the dark sky to the dark earth. The temperature has dropped since you began your rounds. You feel it most in your ears and the back of your neck, the skin there tightening slightly against the damp cold. You draw your outer robe closer around your shoulders, a simple gesture that you have made thousands of times, and you notice the way the fabric smells when it is damp, a faint scent of old incense and wood smoke and the clean mineral odor of mountain rain. Your breathing slows, matching the rhythm of the downpour, and your thoughts become quiet and unurgent, drifting like the mist in the gorge. Time passes without you marking it. The rain continues, its sound now so constant that it has become a kind of silence, a background that erases smaller noises and makes the world feel small and contained. You think of the storehouse roof, whether it is still holding against the wet. You think of the drainage channels cut into the stone paths, how they will be full of rushing water by now, carrying the rain away from the foundation stones. You think of the lantern in the main hall, how its oil should last until the deep night, if the wick has been properly trimmed. These thoughts come and go without urgency, like leaves floating on a slow stream, and you do not hold on to any of them for long. Eventually you rise from the bench and step to the doorway of the gatehouse. The rain is falling harder now, a dense curtain of water that obscures the far side of the courtyard. You can no longer see the main hall clearly. Its lantern is a blur of orange light, softened and spread by the rain into a diffuse glow. The pebbles in the courtyard are invisible beneath a shallow sheet of moving water that finds its way across the stone toward the drainage channel at the center. The channel itself must be working well because you can hear the water gurgling somewhere below the surface, a low liquid sound that rises and falls with the gusts of wind. You stand in the doorway for a long time, one hand resting on the doorframe, and you feel the cool spray of the rain carried in by the wind. Fine droplets that settle along your face and the front of your robe without soaking through. The last trace of daylight is gone now. The sky and the mountain and the forest are all the same depth of black, indistinguishable from one another, and the only light in the world comes from that single lantern across the courtyard. You look up at the roof above you, though you cannot see it, and you listen to the rain striking the tiles, running down the curved channels, dripping from the eaves into the stone gutter. The sound is so steady, so complete, that it seems to you the temple is not a building at all, but a ship moving through a sea of rain, safe and enclosed and entirely separate from the world beyond its walls. Your evening task is complete. The gates are closed, the shutters latched, the outer walls sealed. The storm can do what it will, as it has done on countless nights before, and the temple will still be standing when the light returns. You turn from the doorway and walk back into the gatehouse, where the darkness is absolute and friendly, and you sit down on the bench to wait for the next thing that needs doing, whatever it may be, whenever it may come. The gatehouse is dark around you, a darkness so complete that it feels less like an absence of light and more like a soft black cloth pressed gently against your eyes. You have been sitting on the wooden bench for a time you cannot measure, your breathing slow, your hands folded in your lap, the sound of the rain a steady presence that fills every corner of the small room. The dampness of your robe has begun to warm against your body, and your eyelids have grown heavy, though you are not sleepy in the way of true tiredness, but rather in the way of deep stillness, the kind that comes when all tasks are complete and the body is simply waiting for the next small duty to arise. The next duty comes to mind, not as a thought with words, but as a quiet knowing. The corridor lanterns need lighting. In the main hall a single flame already burns, its orange glow a distant beacon you saw through the rain. But the covered passages that connect the hall to the gatehouse, the kitchen, the library, and the meditation rooms are now entirely black. A monk walking those passages, after dark without a lantern in hand, would have to feel his way along the cold stone walls, counting doorways by touch. You have done that before on nights when the oil ran low, and it is not unpleasant, but the custom of this temple is to keep the corridor lanterns burning from full dark until the deep hours after midnight, small pools of light that guide anyone who might need to move between the buildings. You rise from the bench, and the movement breaks the stillness like a stone dropped into still water. The bench creaks, your robe rustles, your cloth slippers shift on the wooden floor, and for a moment these small sounds seem loud against the background roar of the storm. You reach out in the dark to the shelf on the wall, your fingers finding the spare lantern you noted earlier, the one with the cracked glass pane. You do not need a lantern for yourself because you will carry the taper, but you check it anyway, running your thumb over the crack to confirm it is still only a crack and not a break, then setting it back on the shelf with care. Next to the lantern sits a bundle of long tapers wrapped in a dry cloth. You pull one free, a slender stick of twisted paper soaked in wax, stiff and straight, about the length of your forearm. It feels cool and slightly greasy between your fingers, the wax already softening from the warmth of your hand. With the taper in hand, you leave the gatehouse and step back into the covered west passage. The rain has not lessened since you closed the shutters. If anything, it has grown heavier, a dense wall of water that pounds the roof tiles in an unbroken rhythm. The air in the passage is cold and damp, smelling of wet stone and old wood, and the wind has found its way through the small gaps between the roof and the wall, stirring the air just enough to make the skin on your shaved scalp prickle. You turn left, walking the few paces back to the corner where the west passage meets the south, and then you continue straight, heading for the main hall where the only lit flame in the temple waits to share its fire. The journey from gatehouse to main hall is a short one, no more than 40 paces along the covered walkway, but tonight each pace feels deliberate and slow because you are in no hurry and the darkness asks you to move with care. Your left hand trails along the inner wall, the stone rough and cold under your palm, guiding you past the closed shutters you secured not long ago. Each shutter you pass has a familiar feel, the grain of the wood, the slight irregularity of the iron hinge, and your fingers brush them lightly as you go, a silent greeting to things you know well. The taper in your right hand stays upright, protected from the damp by the angle of your body and the overhang of the eaves. As you approach the main hall, the darkness begins to soften. The single lantern inside sends its light through the open doorway, a warm amber glow that spills out onto the flagstones of the courtyard and reflects in the shallow water that has pooled there. The light is not strong, just enough to outline the doorframe and the threshold in the first few feet of the covered passage, but to eyes that have been in total darkness for a long while, it seems almost bright, welcoming, a small sun contained in glass and iron. You pause at the threshold of the hall, looking inside. The Buddha images sit in their silent row at the far end, their bronze surfaces catching the lantern light in dull gleams. The incense burner at the center of the floor still sends up a thin line of smoke, undisturbed by the drafts. The floor cushions are exactly where you left them earlier in the day. Everything is as it should be. You step inside, your slippers leaving faint wet prints on the stone floor. The lantern that burns here is a large one, its iron frame sturdy, its glass panes intact, its wick thick and well trimmed. The oil reservoir at its base is more than half full, a reservoir to clear camellia oil that will burn for many hours yet. You kneel before the lantern, bringing the tip of your taper down to the flame. The waxed paper catches instantly, with a small quiet hiss, and the new flame springs to life. Smaller than the lantern's, but just as steady. You cup your free hand around the flame to shield it from the air currents as you rise and turn back toward the doorway. The taper now, a slender wand of fire held before you like a promise. The corridor lanterns are iron things, each one hanging from a hook, driven into a wooden beam of the covered passage, spaced at intervals of about 12 paces. There are 8 of them along the route you will walk, 2 in the short passage that connects the main hall to the eastern wing, 3 along the long eastern corridor itself, 2 more along the north passage, and a final one near the small kitchen alcove. You have lit them many times, in every season and in every kind of weather, and the process is so familiar that your body knows it better than your mind. You begin with the first lantern, the one closest to the main hall, hanging just outside the doorway under the cover of the eaves. It hangs at eye level, its iron body shaped like a simple cylinder with a round base for oil and a narrow neck that holds the wick. The glass pane on this lantern is clear and clean because you wiped it with a dry cloth 2 days ago, removing the soot that builds up with each burning. You bring the taper up, touching its flame to the wick that protrudes from the narrow opening. The wick is dry and catches quickly, the new flame springing up yellow and bright, taller than necessary for a moment, before you adjust it with the small iron tool that hangs on a chain from the lantern's base. You turn the little knob that raises or lowers the wick, lowering it just enough that the flame settles into a steady teardrop shape, neither smoking nor flickering. You watch it for a moment, watching the way the new flame dances as it finds its balance, and then you move on. The second lantern is 12 paces along the passage that runs east from the main hall. This section of the walkway is narrow, only wide enough for one person to walk comfortably, with the outer wall on the right and the inner courtyard wall on the left. The roof here is lower too, the tiles sloping down close above your head, and the sound of the rain is magnified by the confined space, a constant drumming that seems to come from all directions at once. You reach the second lantern and find it hanging slightly crooked, one side of its iron handle having slipped on the hook. You straighten it with a gentle lift, feeling the weight of the oil slosh quietly inside, and then bring the taper to its wick. This wick is a little damp from the humidity, and it catches more slowly, the flame struggling at first, sputtering with small pops as the moisture burns away. You wait patient, holding the taper steady, and after a few heartbeats, the flame strengthens and grows, a twin to the one you left behind you. You lower the wick slightly with the adjustment knob, watching the flame shrink from a ragged banner to a calm pointed oval, and then you continue. The long eastern corridor stretches ahead of you now, the longest straight passage in the temple, running the full length of the main courtyard and continuing past it to where the library sits in a separate wing. 3 lanterns hang along this corridor, and as you walk you can see them in your mind's eye before you've reached them, their dark shapes suspended from the beams like sleeping birds. The rain is loudest here because the eastern corridor faces the open valley, and even though the shutters are closed, the sound of the storm comes through the outer wall as a deep, continuous roar that makes the wooden floor vibrate faintly underfoot. Your taper flame bends and straightens, moved by the small draughts that slip through the gaps, and you shield it with your cupped hand, your palm warm from the flame's proximity. You reach the 3rd lantern, the first of the 3 along the eastern corridor, and you pause before lighting it because you notice a tiny spider has built a web between the lantern's handle and the beam above. The web is no bigger than your thumbnail, a delicate wheel of silk that glistens with trapped moisture. You do not disturb it, but instead ring the taper up carefully from the side, lighting the wick without touching the web. The spider, if it is still there, does not move. The new flame settles into its steady shape, and the light it casts reveals more webs along the beams, thin silver lines that tremble with every gust of wind. Architectural wonders built in the quiet hours between your rounds. The 4th lantern hangs at the midpoint of the eastern corridor, directly across from the door that leads into the meditation hall. This door is closed tonight, its wooden surface dark and plain, its iron handle cold to the touch. You pass it without opening it, knowing that the room beyond is empty and cold, its cushions stored in the cupboard, its floor swept clean. The lantern here has a small pool of oil in its catch basin beneath the wick, the result of a slight leak in the reservoir that you have not yet repaired. The oil has not spread beyond the basin, and you make a mental note to check it again in the morning, a note that will dissolve into action when the time comes without needing to be remembered in words. You light the wick, the flame reflecting in the tiny pool of leaked oil like a second smaller flame, and then you adjust the height until it burns cleanly. The 5th lantern is the last of the eastern corridor, hanging near the corner where the passage turns north toward the kitchen and the storehouse. This lantern has a different shape from the others, its iron body slightly taller and thinner, a replacement brought up from the valley 3 summers ago when the old one rusted through. Its glass pane has a faint greenish tint, the result of impurities in the sand used to make it, and the light it casts is subtly different, cooler, more like moonlight than firelight. You light it with care, the taper now half-burned, its waxed paper softening in your grip, a thin trail of wax running down to your knuckle where it hardens into a small white bead. You watch the new flame settle, then turn the corner and walk into the north passage. The north passage is the shortest of the temple's corridors, only long enough to hold 2 lanterns, and it is also the quietest because the mountain slope rises steeply just beyond the outer wall, blocking the wind and muffling the sound of the rain. Here the storm sounds far away, a distant rushing rather than an immediate pounding, and the air is still enough that your taper flame burns upright without flickering. You reach the 6th lantern, hanging just outside the kitchen alcove, and you see that its oil reservoir is low, the dark liquid barely covering the bottom. You open the small door at the lantern's base and tilt in a measure of oil from the clay bottle that sits on a nearby shelf, waiting for this very purpose. The oil pours slowly, thick as honey, releasing a faint floral scent as it settles into the reservoir. You close the door, wipe your fingers on a rag that hangs from a hook, and touch the taper to the wick. The flame catches instantly, bright and eager, as if glad of the fresh oil. The 7th lantern hangs at the far end of the north passage, just before the doorway that leads out to the rear terrace and the bell tower steps. This is the coldest part of the temple at night, the air always a few degrees cooler than elsewhere because of the nearby stone of the mountain that never fully warms. You feel the cold on your ears and the bridge of your nose as you approach the lantern, your breath forming small clouds that the taper flame pushes aside. This lantern has a crack in its glass pane too, a small one in the lower corner. Not enough to let the wind in, but enough that the flame will gutter if a strong gust finds it. You make the same note about replacing the glass, a note without urgency, and you light the wick with a hand that has grown tired from holding the taper upright. The flame settles, and you adjust it with the little iron tool, the metal clicking softly against the wick holder. You stand for a moment at the end of the north passage, looking out through the open doorway toward the rear terrace. The rain is visible here as a shifting silver curtain just beyond the cover of the eaves, falling onto the flagstones with a sound like rice being poured into a wooden bowl. The bell tower rises to the left, a dark square shape against the slightly less dark sky, and you can hear the rain drumming on its tiled roof. A higher-pitched sound than the drumming on the main temple roof because the tower roof is smaller and steeper. You will climb those steps later, you know, to check the ropes and wipe the beam, but that is a task for another hour. Now the lanterns call you back the way you came. You retrace your steps along the north passage, past the sixth lantern now burning steadily, past the corner into the eastern corridor where the three flames you lit earlier form a line of warm orange points that recede into the distance like a constellation brought down to earth. The taper in your hand is now short, the flame dangerously close to your fingers, and you pause at the fifth lantern to light a fresh taper from the stash you keep in a small wooden box attached to the beam near the corner. The box is dry inside, its lid fitting tight, and the tapers within are wrapped in oiled paper that crinkles as you pull one free. You touch the new taper to the old, transferring the flame with a small prayer of gratitude for the continuity of fire, and then you pinch out the old stub between wet fingers and drop it into the clay pot you carry for this purpose, the pot that hangs from your belt on a loop of twine. The eighth and final lantern is the one you left for last, hanging near the gatehouse where you began your rounds. It is not on the main route you walked earlier because you took a different path to the main hall, but now, as you complete the circuit, you approach it from the west passage, walking slowly, your new taper bright and tall. This lantern is the oldest of all, its iron body pitted with rust, its glass pane clouded by years of soot that no amount of wiping can fully remove. It hangs a little lower than the others because its chain has stretched over time, each link elongating almost invisibly under the weight. You have to duck your head slightly to reach the wick, and as you do so, you notice the smell of the old iron, a faint metallic tang mixed with the sweet scent of burning oil. You touch the taper to the wick, and the eighth flame comes to life, completing the ring of light that now encircles the inner temple. You step back and look along the corridor. The lanterns are all burning now, their flames small and identical in the distance, each one a tiny sun holding back a small portion of the night. The rain continues to fall, its sound unchanged, but the quality of the darkness has shifted. The passages are no longer black voids, but gentle avenues of amber light and soft shadow, the light reflecting from the polished wood of the beams, the wet flagstones of the courtyard, the bronze door handles, the still surface of the water in the drainage channel. The temple feels, in this moment, not like a building, but like a living thing that has opened its eyes, its many small eyes, to watch the storm through the night. You return the fresh taper to its box, close the lid with care, and walk back through the north passage to the kitchen alcove, where the kettle waits cold and empty, a task for another hour. For now, you simply stand in the doorway of the kitchen, the light of the sixth lantern warm on your back, and you look out at the rain-soaked courtyard and the ring of steady flames that you've endured, one by one, in the long quiet of the early night. You step through the doorway of the main hall, passing from the covered passage into a space that feels, in the first instant, entirely separate from the storm outside. The threshold is a single stone slab worn smooth by centuries of feet, its surface slightly lower than the passage floor so that rainwater has never flowed inward. Your slippers cross it without sound, and the air changes as you enter. It becomes warmer by a few degrees, stiller, carrying the faint dry scent of old incense powder and the cool mineral smell of bronze statues. The light from the single large lantern fills the hall with a steady amber glow, that reaches every corner, softened by the dark wood of the pillars and the high-shadowed rafters where the roof peak rises into gloom. The main hall is not vast as temple halls go, but it is tall. The ceiling soars upward, a lattice of thick beams and cross ties that support the great curving roof, and the space above your head seems to hold the darkness like a cup holds water. You pause just inside the doorway and look up, as you often do, watching the faint drift of incense smoke rise through the lantern light until it disappears into the shadows above. The smoke moves slowly, undisturbed by drafts, its thin white line bending into soft curves that vanish into nothing, one after another, without pattern or hurry. You turn your attention to the lantern itself, the same one you used to light your taper. It sits on the stone floor near the center of the hall, its iron base solid, its glass panes glowing orange, the flame within a bright teardrop that barely flickers. The oil reservoir is still more than half full, and the wick is trimmed well, its charred tip a small dark cap on the glowing thread. You walk to it, kneel on the floor cushion that has been placed there for this purpose, and lift the small iron tool from its chain. You do not adjust the flame because it needs no adjustment, but you check the oil level by lifting the little door at the base and peering inside. The camellia oil is clear and golden, its surface perfectly still, and the scent that rises is clean and faintly sweet, like nuts warmed by the sun. You close the door and rest your hands on your knees. The Buddha images sit in their row at the northern end of the hall, facing south toward the main doors that are closed and barred for the night. There are 3 of them. The central figure, larger than the other 2, all cast in bronze that has darkened over time to a deep brown black, the high points of their faces and hands polished to a soft gleam by incense smoke and the touch of many years. Their expressions are the same, eyes half closed, mouths curved in the faintest suggestion of a smile that is not joy, but something quieter, something beyond joy and sorrow. You look at them without staring, letting your gaze rest on the central figure's hands, one raised with palm outward, the other resting open on the lap, and you feel the familiar quiet that comes from being in their presence, a quiet that has nothing to do with sound. The incense burner stands before the central image, a bronze tripod vessel about the height of your knee, its belly round and its mouth open. A single stick of incense burns there, the one you lit at sunset, its tip a small red ember that pulses softly with each movement of air, too subtle to feel. The ash column that has grown beneath it is perfectly straight, not yet fallen, and the line of smoke that rises from the ember is thin as spider silk, blue-grey against the dark wood of the altar. You watch it rise, and as you watch, a tiny section of ash collapses without sound onto the pile below, the ember now a little closer to the fresh wood. You rise from the lantern and walk slowly across the stone floor to the cushion that waits before the altar. This cushion is round and thick, stuffed with buckwheat hulls that shift softly under your weight as you kneel, their faint rustle a dry sound like leaves brushing stone. You settle your weight onto your heels, straighten your back, let your hands rest palms down on your thighs, and close your eyes. The darkness inside your eyelids is not total. The lantern light presses through the thin skin, turning the darkness a warm reddish-brown, the color of earth after rain. The first thing you hear when your eyes close is the rain. It has been there all along, a constant background since the early evening, but now it becomes the foreground, the main voice in the hall. The great roof above you is a vast sounding board, its curved tiles receiving the downpour and transmitting the impact through the wooden beams into the air of the hall. The sound is not a single note, but a layered chord, the high sharp taps of drops striking the glazed surface of the tiles. The deeper drumming where water pools in the concave channels between the tile rows, the steady roar of the accumulated flow rushing down the slopes to the eaves. All these sounds blend into one continuous voice that fills the hall from the floor to the highest rafter, a voice without words that speaks of the sky and the mountain and the endless falling water. You listen to this voice for a long while, your breathing slow, your body still. The rain's rhythm seems steady at first, but as you listen more closely, you notice the subtle changes. Now a gust of wind drives the drops harder against the south slope, making the drumming deeper. Now the wind eases and the rain falls straight down, its sound softening to a gentle roar. These changes come and go like waves on a shore, rising and falling without end, and you let them pass through you without holding on to them. The drainage chains are another voice, smaller and nearer. These chains hang from the iron spouts at the four corners of the eaves, long links of bronze that guide rainwater from the roof down to the stone channels below. You can hear the water running along the chains, even from inside the hall. A thin, musical trickle that is almost a gurgle, a sound of liquid moving over metal in a narrow path. Each chain produces its own note depending on its length and the flow of water, and together they make a soft chorus that weaves through the deeper sound of the roof, like a thread through heavy cloth. The chain at the southeast corner has a slight kink in its third link, you recall, which makes the water there pause and spill over with a small splash before continuing down. You hear that splash now, distinct and regular, a tiny punctuation in the long sentence of the storm. Other sounds join the rain as you sit. The timbers of the roof settle with small creaks, the wood responding to the weight of the water and the cooling of the night air. A door somewhere in a distant passage stirs against its latch, pushed by a draught you cannot feel from here. The incense ember hisses once, very softly as it consumes a grain of resin. Each sound is separate and clear, rising out of the background and then falling back into it, and you greet each one without needing to name it or respond. Your knees begin to feel the pressure of the floor through the cushion, a dull sensation that is not pain but a signal of position. You shift your weight slightly, adjusting the angle of your hips, and the buckwheat hulls rustle again before settling. Your hands are still on your thighs, the thumbs resting lightly against the index fingers, and you notice the warmth of your own skin, the pulse in your wrists that beats slow and steady. Your breathing has become so quiet that you cannot hear it over the rain, but you can feel the rise and fall of your belly against the inner layer of your robe. Time passes in the way it passes in deep meditation, not as a line, but as a pool. You do not know how long you have knelt, and you do not need to know. The lantern oil burns down by a fraction of a finger's width. The incense stick shortens by another section of ash that drops silently onto the pile. The rain continues, its voice now so familiar that it has become a kind of silence, a presence that erases the boundary between the inside of your mind and the outside of the world. You open your eyes after a time, not because you have decided to, but because the eyes simply open, and the hall is as it was, the lantern still burning, the Buddha images still gazing, the incense smoke still rising. The only difference is the quality of the shadows, which have deepened slightly as the flame has settled, or perhaps as your eyes have grown accustomed to the dimness. You look up at the rafters and see, high above, a single cobweb that trembles with the vibration of the roof, a small movement that catches the lantern light like a strand of silver. You rise from the cushion, moving slowly, because your legs have grown stiff, and you walk to the southeast corner of the hall to check the drainage chain from the inside. There is a small window there, set high in the wall and left unshuttered because the eaves protect it from direct rain. You stand beneath it and look up through the opening. The bronze chain is visible against the dark sky, its links glinting with water, and you see the kink in the third link where the water pools and spills. The stone channel below it is running full, carrying water away toward the cistern at the north end of the courtyard, and you can see the flow is smooth and unblocked, a clear ribbon of water that reflects the distant lantern light in shifting patterns. You return to the center of the hall, but you do not kneel again. Instead, you stand near the lantern and look at the floor, the broad stone slabs that have been here since the temple was built. They are dark with age, each one a different shade of gray, some with hairline cracks that have never widened, others with faint depressions worn by the feet of monks long gone. You step from slab to slab, tracing a path that you have traced many times, and you feel the slight unevenness of the stone under your slippers, the coolness that rises through the thin fabric. The main doors of the hall face south, and though they are closed and barred, the wind presses against them in slow waves, making the great iron hinges give out a low groan each time the pressure changes. You walk to the doors and place your palm flat against the wood. The cypress is cool but not cold, its grain rough under your fingers, and you feel the vibration of the storm transmitted through the thick planks. It is like touching the skin of a drum. The rain beats on the outer side, and the wood sings quietly back. You stand there with your hand on the door for a long moment, and then you turn and walk back to the lantern. The flame needs no attention, but you give it some anyway, using the small iron tool to nudge the wick a hair's breadth higher so that the flame grows slightly brighter. The light reaches farther now, illuminating the painted scrolls that hang on the side walls, long vertical banners of silk with faded characters that speak of compassion and the path. The silk has darkened over the years, the gold thread of the characters now a dull brown, but the words are still legible, their meaning unchanged by time. You read them without reading, your eyes passing over the shapes, and then you look away. The rain outside has shifted tone. The roar is deeper now, the drops larger, falling with more weight. You can tell from the sound on the roof tiles that the storm has entered a new phase, the clouds heavy with moisture gathered from the distant sea. The drainage chains gurgle louder, and a small drip begins somewhere near the northwest corner, a steady tap that means a tile has slipped slightly and water is finding its way through. You walk to the northwest corner and look up. A dark stain has spread across the wooden ceiling board, and a single drop of water hangs from its center, swelling until it falls onto the stone floor where it joins a small puddle no wider than a teacup. You place an empty clay bowl under the drip, the bowl that sits on a shelf nearby precisely for this purpose, and the water begins to strike the bowl's bottom with a high clear note that rises above the rain's lower voice. You kneel again on the cushion before the altar, folding your hands in your lap, and you let the new sound join the others, the drumming roof, the gurgling chains, the tapping bowl, the settling timbers, the hissing incense. The hall is full of small voices, each one a thread in a fabric that wraps around you, and you sit at the center of it, still and quiet, a listener without urgency. The lantern burns on. The incense burns on. The rain falls on the mountain, and the mountain receives it without complaint, letting it run down the slopes into the valleys, into the streams, into the rivers, into the sea that will one day send it back as cloud. You think of this cycle, the great wheel of water turning above and below you, and the thought is not a thought, so much as a feeling of connectedness to things that are larger and older than yourself. You breathe in the scent of incense and wet wood. Breathe out the small warmth of your body, and the two breaths are the same length, the same calm tide. Time passes again, and the flame in the lantern burns a little lower as the oil level drops by another fraction. You rise to add oil, lifting the clay bottle that sits beside the altar, and you pour a slow stream into the reservoir, watching the golden liquid swirl and settle. The wick drinks the fresh oil, and the flame steadies, brighter than before. You close the bottle, wipe the rim with a cloth, and return it to its place. Then you stand in the center of the hall and turn a slow circle, looking at everything, the Buddhas, the scrolls, the incense burner, the lantern, the ball-catching drips, the dark rafters, the closed doors. Everything is as it should be, and you feel a quiet satisfaction that is not pride, but something simpler, something like the feeling of a stone that sits exactly where it is meant to sit. You walk to the doorway and stand on the threshold, looking out into the covered passage. The corridor lanterns you lit earlier are still burning, their flames small and steady in the distance, marking the path he walked. The rain is a silver curtain just beyond the eaves, falling so thickly that you cannot see the far side of the courtyard. The air that comes in from the passage is cool and damp, a contrast to the warmth of the hall, and you feel it on your face like a gentle hand. You breathe it in, let it fill your lungs, and then you turn back into the hall. You will stay here a while longer, you decide, not because there is anything to do, but because this is where you want to be. The main hall in Rain is a good place, a peaceful place, and you have no reason to leave it yet. You walk back to the cushion, kneel once more, and close your eyes, letting the many voices of the storm wrap around you like a blanket woven of sound and shadow, and the patient passing of a mountain night. The tea kettle sits on its iron trivet in the small kitchen alcove, cold and empty, waiting for you to begin the slow ritual of the evening tea. You have left the main hall behind for now, Its warm lantern light and deep roof song still present in your mind like a held note, but your body has carried you along the North Passage to the place where water meets fire. The kitchen is not a separate building, but a recess carved into the inner wall of the North Corridor, just deep enough for one person to stand and work. Its 3 walls of stone sheltering a clay stove, a low preparation table, and a shelf that holds the few utensils needed for a simple meal. The corridor lantern you lit earlier burns just outside the alcove, its light spilling sideways into the small space and catching the curve of the kettle's iron belly in a dull gleam. You step into the alcove and stand before the preparation table, a slab of dark wood worn concave in the center, where generations of hands have chopped vegetables and kneaded dough. Tonight there's no meal to prepare, only tea, and the table is bare except for a clay teapot wrapped in a thick cloth to keep it warm after brewing, and a lacquered tray holding 3 small cups nested together like a family of bowls. You touch the teapot's cloth covering, feeling the dry weave, and then you turn to the kettle. It is a sturdy thing, cast in iron, its mouth wide, its handle a thick arch of twisted metal that has been darkened by decades of smoke. You lift it from the trivet, testing its weight. Empty. It swings lightly in your hand, the handle cool against your palm. Water is the first requirement, and water waits in the stone cistern at the north end of the courtyard. You take the wooden bucket from its hook on the alcove wall, a bucket bound with iron bands, its rope handle smooth from use, and you step out of the kitchen into the covered passage. The rain has not paused or weakened. It continues to fall in the same dense sheets you have been listening to all evening, and the few steps between the alcove and the cistern will be enough to wet your shoulders and sleeves. You do not mind this. The coolness of the rain is a small refreshment, a brief contact with the world outside the temple's dry interior. The cistern stands at the center of the north courtyard, a round stone basin raised to waist height, fed by the drainage channels that run from every corner of the temple complex. Its surface is dark and rippling under the rain, the water within deep and clear, constantly renewed by the flow from the roof. You set the bucket on the stone rim and lower it by the rope, feeling the weight change as the wood touches water, then fills. The bucket sinks, the rope slides through your fingers, and when you feel the slight tug that means it is full, you draw it up hand over hand, the rope dripping, the bucket rising through the rain-streaked air until it rests again on the rim. The water within is cold and faintly fragrant with the clean mineral scent of the mountain rock through which it is filtered before reaching the cistern. A few pine needles float on its surface, blown there by the wind, and you skim them out with the side of your hand before lifting the bucket by its handle. The walk back to the kitchen is only 12 paces, but you take them slowly because the bucket is heavy and the flagstones are wet, and you have no desire to spill water that has traveled so far from cloud to cistern. Your slippers press small puddles aside with each step, and the rain drums on your shaved head and the back of your neck, each drop a cold point that fades into the general coolness. You reach the alcove and set the bucket on the preparation table, its wooden bottom making a solid thunk against the worn surface. Water sloshes gently against the sides, then stills. Now you turn your attention to the stove. The clay stove is a simple construction, a hollow cylinder with a round opening at the front for fuel and a round opening at the top to receive the kettle. It is stained black with years of smoke, and a fine layer of ash coats the ledge inside the fuel opening. You kneel before it, your knees finding the 2 small depressions in the stone floor that mark where countless monks have knelt before you, and you reach for the tinderbox that sits on a shelf at knee height. The tinderbox is a wooden case containing a curved iron striker, a piece of flint the size of your thumb, and a small nest of dried moss and shredded cedar bark. You open the box and arrange these items on the floor beside you. First the moss nest, then the flint in your left hand, then the striker in your right. Striking a spark is a skill that took you many months to learn and many years to master. You hold the flint at the proper angle, bring the striker down in a glancing blow, and a small shower of orange sparks flies into the moss. The moss glows briefly where the sparks land, then darkens. You strike again, the iron ringing softly against the stone, and this time one spark holds, a tiny orange ember that pulses in the heart of the moss like a breathing thing. You lift the nest to your lips and blow gently. Not a sharp puff, but a slow stream of air that feeds the ember without extinguishing it. The moss begins to smoke, thin white threads that sting your eyes with their sharp scent, and then a small flame appears, yellow at the base, blue at the tip, barely larger than a candle flame, but already eager. You place the burning moss in the stove's fuel opening and begin to feed it with small twigs from the bundle of kindling that hangs in a net bag from the alcove beam. The twigs are dry and snap easily between your fingers, their ends frayed where you have split them with a small knife. You lay them across the moss flame one by one, watching each catch and begin to burn, the thin bark curling back, the wood beneath turning black and then bright orange. The fire grows with a quiet crackling, a sound so small that the rain nearly drowns it, and the heat begins to push outward from the stove opening, warming your face and the fronts of your hands. You add larger sticks now, finger-thick pieces of pine that have been drying in the storehouse since the spring, their surfaces sticky with crystallized resin that catches instantly and burns with a high, clear flame. The fire begins to roar softly, a new voice in the kitchen's small chorus of sounds, and the clay stove absorbs the heat, its walls warming from black to a deep red-brown. You sit back on your heels and watch the fire settle, adjusting the placement of the sticks with a long iron poker until the flames burn evenly across the full width of the stove opening. The kettle is next. You lift it from the trivet and fill it with the cistern water, pouring from the bucket with a steady hand, the water gurgling into the iron mouth with a hollow sound that deepens as the kettle fills. You stop when the water reaches the line scratched inside the neck, a line that leaves room for boiling without overflow. The kettle is heavy now, its handle cold, its iron belly beaded with condensation from the cool water meeting the cool air. You set it on the stove's top opening, the iron base fitting neatly into the circular rim, and you adjust its position slightly so that it sits level. The flames below lick at the iron bottom, and the first small sounds of heating begin. A faint tick, a soft hiss where a drop of water has fallen onto the hot stove rim. With the kettle in place, you turn to the preparation of the tea things. The lacquered tray holds 3 cups, as is the custom, even though you are alone tonight. The extra cups are for any traveler who might arrive, any pilgrim lost on the mountain path, any teacher or friend who might step through the gate. No one has arrived, and the gate is barred, but the cups are set out nonetheless, a small act of readiness that connects you to the wider world. You separate the nested cups and place them side by side on the tray, their interiors dark and glossy, their rims thin enough to let light through. Each cup is a deep brown black, the lacquer applied in many layers over shaped wood, and the surface is so smooth that your fingertips glide over it without resistance. Beside the cups you place the teapot, still wrapped in its cloth, and the small clay caddy that holds the tea leaves. You open the caddy and tilt it toward the lantern light from the corridor. The leaves within are dark and twisted, rolled into small pellets that smell of earth and dried flowers. A green tea from the terraced gardens of the valley below, carried up the mountain path months ago and stored in a cool, dry corner of the storehouse. You measure out a small handful into the palm of your hand, the leaves light and fragile, and you drop them into the teapot, where they scatter across the bottom with a sound like soft rain on dry leaves. The water in the kettle begins to stir. At first there is only the faintest whisper, a sound so low it might be imagined, but as the moments pass it grows into a soft murmur, the voice of water approaching its change. Small bubbles form on the inner iron walls and rise, clinging, then releasing to float upward through the body of the water. The lid of the kettle trembles slightly, and a thin wisp of steam escapes from the spout, curling upward into the shadows of the alcove ceiling. You watch this steam with quiet attention, knowing that the water is still some minutes from the boil, and that these minutes cannot be hurried. You wipe the preparation table with a damp cloth, clearing away the few drops of water and the specks of ash that have settled there. You rinse the cloth in the remaining bucket water and hang it on its hook to dry. You check the fire through the stove opening, adding one more stick where the flames have burned a hollow in the fuel, and then you lean back against the alcove wall and let your hands rest on your knees. The warmth of the stove fills the small kitchen now, pushing back the damp cold of the corridor, and the steam from the kettle spout has grown thicker, a steady column of white vapor that rises and dissipates into the moving air. The sound of the kettle is the center of your attention now. It rises through stages as the water heats, first the whisper of convection, then the faint singing of the iron as it expands, then the first true bubbling that begins low in the vessel's belly. The bubbles grow larger and more frequent. They rise and collapse, creating a soft, rhythmic churning that blends with the rain and the fire into a single woven sound. Your breathing slows to match this rhythm without your intending it, and your eyelids grow heavy, though you are not sleepy, but simply at rest, suspended in the warm, dark kitchen while the storm continues its work outside. The boil comes eventually, as it always does, the water surging upward in a sudden rush of large bubbles that rattle the kettle lid and send a strong jet of steam from the spout. You lift the kettle from the stove with a thick cloth wrapped around the handle, the iron hot even through the padding, and you carry it to the preparation table. The steam rises around your face, clean and hot, and for a moment the world is only white vapor and the smell of heated iron. You pour the boiling water into the teapot in a slow, steady stream, watching the dark leaves swirl and rise, tumbling in the heat, beginning to unfurl and release their color into the water. The scent that rises is green and sweet and faintly grassy, the scent of distant terraces and spring sunlight captured and carried to this mountain on a monk's back. You set the kettle back on the stove, where the remaining water will stay warm but not boil, and you cover the teapot with its cloth, tucking the edges around the ceramic to hold the heat inside. The tea needs time to steep, and time is something you have in abundance. You arrange the 3 cups on the tray one final time, adjusting their spacing so that they sit in a perfect row, their interiors waiting to receive the pale green liquid that is even now drawing strength from the leaves. Then you sit on a low stool that occupies the corner of the alcove, fold your hands inside your sleeves, and wait through the quiet minutes of steeping with the patience of one who knows that tea cannot be rushed, that the leaves will give their essence when they are ready, and not a moment before. The rain drums on the roof above the kitchen, a smaller roof than the main halls, its sound higher and lighter. The corridor lantern flickers once as a gust of wind finds its way through the passage, but it steadies again without your help. The fire in the stove settles into a bed of glowing coals, its crackling now a soft ticking as the last resins burn away, and you sit in the center of these small sounds waiting for tea, while the mountain night deepens around the temple like water around a stone. The tea steeps in its covered pot on the preparation table, and the kitchen alcove holds the warmth of the stove like a small animal curled in its den. You rise from the low stool, your legs stiff in a pleasant way, the kind of stiffness that comes from sitting still in a warm place while the storm works beyond the walls. The tea will be ready soon, but there is time before the pouring, time enough to walk the short circuit that includes the storehouse and the inner courtyard, to put your eyes on the supplies that sustain the temple through the rainy season. You draw your outer robe closer, not because the kitchen is cold, but because the passages beyond it will be cool and damp, and you take the hooded lantern from its peg near the stove. This lantern is smaller than the corridor lanterns, built for carrying, its iron body shaped like a small house with a pointed cap that vents the smoke. A ring at the top fits over your first finger, and the handle is wrapped in leather darkened by the oils of many hands. Its glass pane is only on the front, the back and sides being solid iron, so the light it throws is a single warm beam that you can direct where you will. The flame within is low, just a blue-yellow teardrop above the oil, and you turn the little knob to raise the wick a fraction, brightening the beam for the walk ahead. You step out of the kitchen and turn left into the north passage, the same short corridor where 2 lanterns burn at either end. The flagstones underfoot are damp but not wet, sheltered as they are from the direct rain, and your slippers make a soft brushing sound as you walk. The hooded lantern swings gently from your finger, its beam sliding across the stone wall, the wooden pillars, the closed shutters, revealing each surface in brief warm illumination before moving on. You pass the 6th corridor lantern, the one with the fresh oil, and you pause to touch its iron body with your free hand. It is warm but not hot, its flame steady, its oil levels still high. Satisfied, you continue toward the rear of the temple. The storehouse stands at the far northern end of the compound, tucked against the mountain slope where the natural coolness of the rock helps preserve the food and supplies within. It is a separate structure, not a room in a larger hall, built low and square with thick stone walls and a heavy roof of dark tiles. Its single door faces south toward the courtyard, and its only window is a narrow slit high on the east wall, too small for anything larger than a cat to pass through. You approach the door, your lantern beam picking out the grain of the wood, the iron hinges, the large lock plate with its keyhole shaped like a crescent moon. The key hangs from your belt on a loop of braided hemp, a heavy iron key with a long shaft and 2 teeth. You work it free from the loop and insert it into the lock, feeling the familiar resistance as the teeth engage the tumblers. The key turns with a solid clunk that you feel through your wrist, and the lock opens, the bolt sliding back from the stone door frame. You push the door inward, and it moves smoothly on its hinges, the iron having been oiled with camellia oil before the rainy season began. The air that greets you is cool and dry and smells of grain dust, dried herbs, and the faint clean tang of the cedar boards that line the interior walls. You step inside and raise the lantern high. The storehouse is a single room, perhaps 10 paces by 8, with a packed earth floor covered in wooden planks to keep the stores off the ground. Wooden shelves line every wall from floor to ceiling, and on these shelves sit clay jars, woven baskets, hemp sacks, and small wooden boxes, each labeled with a brush-written tag that names its contents and the date it was stored. The air is still, undisturbed by the storm, and the only sound is the distant drumming of rain on the roof tiles above the ceiling boards, muffled by the layer of insulating air in the attic space. You begin your inspection with the grain sacks, as you always do. These are stacked on a low platform at the back of the storehouse. Heavy sacks of rice and millet and barley, each one sealed with a twisted hemp cord. You count them with a touch of your hand, your palm pressing against each sack in turn. 1, 2, 3 sacks of rice, 2 of millet, 1 of barley that is only half full and will need replenishment before the winter. The sacks are dry, they're weaved tight, and no evidence of mice or insects shows on their surfaces. You kneel and check the platform beneath them, running your finger along the wood where it meets the floor. It is dry. No water has seeped in from the mountain slope, and the drainage channel you dug last autumn is doing its work, carrying the runoff away to the east. Next are the dried herb bundles hanging from the ceiling beams. These are your medicines, your teas, your flavorings for the simple meals, bunches of mugwort, sprigs of dried ginger root, clusters of chrysanthemum flowers tied with white string, branches of cinnamon bark curled like scrolls. You lift the lantern so that its beam plays over each bundle, checking for mold or dampness. The herbs are crisp and fragrant, their colors muted by drying but still distinct, the mugwort pale green, the chrysanthemums are faded gold. A few dried leaves have fallen to the floor beneath them, and you make a note to sweep them up, a task for the daylight hours, when sweeping is more natural than in the deep of night. The clay jars on the shelves hold preserved vegetables, pickled radishes and salted plums, fermented bean paste sealed under a layer of oil. You lift the lid of one jar and sniff. The sharp sour scent of proper fermentation rises to meet you, clean and strong, with no hint of spoilage. The seal of oil on the bean paste is unbroken, its surface smooth as dark glass. You replace the lid and move on to the next jar, and the next, each inspection a small ritual of confirming that the temple's small wealth of food is safe, that the months of growing and harvesting and preserving have not been undone by damp or neglect. The wooden boxes on the lower shelves contain the tea supply, the same green tea you are even now steeping in the kitchen, and you open one box to check its contents. The rolled leaves are dry and dark, their scent still potent, and the paper lining the box crinkles under your touch. You close the box and note its weight, still more than half full, enough for many weeks of evening tea. Beside the tea boxes sits a small clay pot of honey, sealed with a waxed cloth, and you lift it to test its weight. It is heavy, thick, the honey within crystallized slightly from the cold, but still good, still sweet, still carrying the memory of summer blossoms from the lower slopes. The back corner of the storehouse holds the tools, spare hoe blades, a roll of hemp rope, a coil of wire for mending fences, a box of iron nails of various sizes, a sharpening stone wrapped in oiled leather. You check the sharpening stone first, running your thumb over its surface to feel the grit. It is dry and ready. The rope is tight in its coil, no fraying, no rot. The nails show no rust, their iron surface is protected by a thin film of oil that you applied at the start of the rains. Everything is orderly, everything in its place, the small material wealth of a mountain temple preserved against the long wet months. You turn to the door, satisfied with your inspection, but before you leave, you raise the lantern one last time and sweep its beam slowly around the entire room. The shadows shift and swing, the shelves emerge and retreat, the hanging herbs turn in the slight draft from the open door. You are looking for anything out of place, any sign of water on the walls, any droppings that might indicate a rat has found its way inside. There is nothing. The storehouse is sound, dry, stocked, and secure. You step out, pull the door close behind you and lock it with the heavy key, feeling the bolt slide home with the same solid clunk. The key goes back onto your belt loop, the cool iron resting against your hip. Now you turn your attention to the inner courtyard. The storehouse door opens onto a narrow covered passage that leads back toward the main courtyard, and you follow it, your lantern beam bobbing ahead of you. The passage opens onto the wide flagged space at the center of the temple, the open square where the pebble paths meet, where the central well rises under its small tiled roof, where the moss garden grows between the stones. The rain here is falling directly onto the flagstones, no roof to intercept it, and the sound is different, sharper, closer, a continuous splashing that echoes slightly off the surrounding walls. You step to the edge of the covered passage and stand under the eaves, your lantern held forward to illuminate the scene. The courtyard is a shallow lake in the darkness. The flagstones are invisible beneath a sheet of moving water that reflects the orange glow of the corridor lanterns in broken fragments, shifting and reforming with each gust of wind. The central well cover is a dark mound in the middle of this water, its small roof shedding rain in 4 streams that fall from the corner spouts into the flooded stone channel below. The moss garden to the right is a black velvet cushion, its surface glistening, each tiny leaf holding a bead of water that catches the lantern light like a jewel. The pebble path that leads from the main hall to the gatehouse is a river of rounded stones, the water flowing over and between them with a soft gurgling sound. You step out from under the eaves into the rain. The drops strike your shaved head immediately, cold and sharp after the warmth of the storehouse, and your robe begins to darken at the shoulders as the water soaks into the fabric. You do not mind this, as you have never minded the rain, and you walk slowly across the flooded courtyard toward the central well. Your slippers become heavy with water, the cloth squelching softly with each step, and the flagstones underfoot are slick, but not dangerously so, their surfaces roughened by centuries of weather. Your lantern beam plays over the water ahead of you, a warm orange eye in the silver-grey darkness. The well stands at the exact center of the courtyard, a circular stone ring rising to knee-height, its mouth covered by a wooden lid that fits tightly into the rim. The small roof above it is held up by 4 wooden posts, and the tiles are the same, dark grey as all the temple roofs, though these are smaller, cut to fit the modest dimensions of the structure. You check the well lid first, placing your hand on its wet surface and pressing down. It is secure, heavy, and no amount of wind or rain will lift it. The water beneath it, the deep cold water that comes from a spring far inside the mountain, is safe from contamination. Next you check the drainage channel that circles the well and carries water away toward the cistern. This channel is a stone-lined trench, a hand's width across, cut into the flagstones in a careful circle. It is running full tonight, the water moving fast and clear, carrying pine needles and small bits of moss toward the cistern inlet. You crouch down, your knees popping softly, and reach into the channel with your fingers. You find no blockage, no mat of leaves or debris slowing the flow, and the water tugs at your hand with a steady pressure. You straighten up and wipe your fingers on your already wet robe. From the well you walk to the north side of the courtyard, where the moss garden spreads between the flagstones in a thick green carpet. The moss is the oldest living thing in the temple, older than the current buildings, older than the stone walls, a colony that has grown here for as long as the mountain has held this sheltered shelf. You kneel beside it, your wet knees pressing into the wet stone, and you bring the lantern close to inspect the moss's condition. The rain has swollen it, each tiny leaf plump with water, and the color is a deep, rich green that seems almost to glow in the lantern light. The moss is healthy, thriving, doing what moss has always done, drinking the rain, softening the stone, making beauty from the simplest elements. You rise and continue your circuit, walking along the east side of the courtyard where the pebble path leads to the meditation hall door. The pebbles shift under your feet, their rounded surface is slick, and you walk carefully, your lantern beam aimed low to show the way. The meditation hall door is closed, its iron handle wet and cold when you touch it in passing. You do not open it. There is no need. The hall is empty and dark, its cushions stored, its floor swept, its shutters closed against the storm. You will sit there tomorrow perhaps, or the day after, but tonight it is simply another room holding its silence. You complete the circuit at the south side of the courtyard near the main hall doors. The light from the single lantern inside still spills out through the gaps around the doorframe, thin lines of gold that seem very bright against the wet, dark wood. You pause there, standing in the full rain, and you look back across the courtyard at the path you have walked. The water covers everything, a shallow silver sheet that reflects the few lights of the temple in soft, scattered patterns. The central well stands dark and solid. The corridor lanterns burn in their steady row. The rain falls and falls and falls. A small sound reaches you through the storm, the tea kettle in the kitchen, its iron body ticking as it cools on the stove, the sound carrying through the north passage and across the courtyard. It reminds you that the tea is steeping, that the cups are waiting on their tray, that the warmth of the kitchen is only a short walk away. But you do not hurry. You stand a moment longer in the rain, your face lifted to the sky, your eyes closed, feeling the drops strike your eyelids and cheeks and run down the sides of your neck. The water is clean and cool, and it washes away the small tiredness that has settled into your face during the evening's rounds. Finally, you turn and walk back to the covered passage on the north side, stepping under the eaves where the rain stops abruptly, the sound changing from the direct impact on your head to the drumming on the tiles above. Water streams from your robe, dripping onto the flagstones in a small puddle around your feet. You shake your hands, flinging droplets into the darkness, and you wipe your face with your sleeve, which is so wet that the gesture does little but spread the moisture more evenly. Then you lift the hooded lantern, which has burned steadily through all your walking, and you make your way back along the north passage, toward the kitchen alcove, toward the tea, toward the warmth of the stove and the patient cups that have been waiting for you all this while. The kitchen alcove welcomes you back with its lingering warmth and the soft gurgle of the kettle settling on the cooling stove. Your robe is heavy with rainwater, the fabric clinging to your shoulders and dripping onto the flagstones in a slow rhythm that matches the beat of the storm outside. You hang the hooded lantern back on its peg, the small flame still burning steadily inside its glass and iron house, and you stand for a moment near the stove, letting the residual heat press against your wet clothes. The fire has burned down to a bed of coals that glow orange and red in the dark opening, each one pulsing softly as the draft moves across it, and the warmth rises through the front of your robe to touch your chest and face. The tea is ready. You can tell by the color of the steam that rises when you lift the cloth covering from the teapot, a pale green-gray vapor that carries the full scent of the brewed leaves. You pour the first cup slowly, the liquid streaming from the spout in a thin, golden-green ribbon that curls into the lacquered cup with a soft musical sound. The cup warms quickly under your fingers, and you lift it to your face, inhaling the steam before you take the first sip. The tea is hot and clean, slightly bitter at the back of the tongue, with a sweetness that follows a heartbeat later like an echo. You drink the first cup standing, your wet robe forgotten, the warmth of the tea spreading down through your chest into your belly. The second cup you pour with equal care, and this one you carry with you as you leave the kitchen and walk along the north passage toward the library. The tea will keep you company during the next task, the slow work of brush and ink that waits on the low desk in the corner of the manuscript room. You have been copying a sutra for many evenings now, adding a few columns of characters each night, and the scroll has grown longer by the width of your hand since the last new moon. Tonight you will add more, the brush moving in its familiar rhythm, the candle burning down by small degrees, while the rain provides its endless accompaniment. The library is at the eastern end of the temple, a long narrow room that shares a wall with the meditation hall. Its door is a sliding panel of cedar wood set into a groove in the stone floor, and you open it with a gentle push, the wood moving smoothly on its track. The air inside is cooler than the kitchen, but not cold, and it carries the dry, papery scent of old scrolls and stitched books, an odor that has soaked into the walls over generations until the room itself seems to breathe it. You step inside and slide the door closed behind you, the panel settling into its frame with a soft thump. The library is dark except for the light that spills in from the corridor lantern through the gap at the top of the door. You know this room well enough to navigate it without sight, but you will need light for the work ahead, so you cross to the low desk in the corner and set your teacup on the small ceramic tile that serves as a coaster. Then you turn to the shelf where the candles are kept, a row of tall beeswax tapers standing upright in a wooden box lined with paper. You take one, its surface smooth and slightly greasy, and you carry it to the iron candle stand that sits on the left side of the desk. The candle stand is a simple tripod of forged iron, its top a cup that holds the candle upright. You fit the taper into the cup, pressing it down until it stands firm, and then you turn to the corridor for fire. The lantern just outside the library door provides the flame, its wick burning steadily, and you light a thin splinter of pine from its glow, the wood catching quickly with a small crackle. You carry the burning splinter back into the library, shielding it with your cupped palm, and you touch it to the candle wick. The wick catches, the flame springs up yellow and tall, and then it settles as you withdraw the splinter and pinch it out between wet fingers, dropping the charred stub into the small clay dish you keep for this purpose. The candle flame is different from the lantern flames. It is softer, less contained, a living thing that bends and sways with every current of air. Its light is warmer too, more yellow than orange, and it reaches only a short distance before fading into shadow, so that the desk before you is brightly lit while the rest of the library remains in deep gloom. This small circle of light is your whole world now, a pool of gold on the dark wood of the desk, and you settle into it with the comfort of long habit. You kneel on the cushion before the desk, a cushion identical to the one in the main hall but older, its buckwheat hulls compressed into a shallow cup that fits your knees. The desk is a low table of dark wood, its surface scarred with tiny nicks from the brush knives of past copyists, its edges worn smooth by the passage of countless sleeves. On the desk sits the scroll you have been copying, held flat by two wooden weights carved in the shape of resting deer. The scroll is a long sheet of pale mulberry paper, its surface sized with alum so that the ink will not bleed, and it is attached to a wooden roller at each end so that you can wind it forward as you work, exposing a fresh column of emptiness while the finished columns disappear into the roll on the right. Beside the scroll rests the inkstone, a flat black rectangle of slate with a shallow well at one end where the water pools. The inkstick lies across it, a slender cylinder of pressed soot and blue that bears the imprint of the maker's seal on its side. The brush stands upright in a ceramic brush, rest-shaped like a mountain peak, its bamboo handle dark with age, its tip a fine point of white goat hair that you trimmed only yesterday with the small knife that lies in the tray beside it. The water dropper is there too, a tiny porcelain vessel shaped like a lotus bud, its spout no wider than a grass stem. You begin by preparing the ink, a ritual that is as much a part of the copying as the writing itself. You lift the water dropper and let a few drops fall into the well of the inkstone, the water beading on the black slate like pearls. Then you take the ink stick between your thumb and first two fingers, pressing it flat against the stone, and you begin to grind it in slow circles. The sound is a soft grating, a whisper of solid against solid that is barely audible over the rain. The water darkens as the ink dissolves, first a pale grey, then a deeper cloud, and finally a rich black that shines faintly in the candlelight. You grind until the ink is thick enough to coat the back of a spoon, testing it with a dip of your little finger, and then you set the ink stick aside and lift the brush. The brush feels alive in your hand. Its bamboo shaft is warm from the room, its goat hair tip soft and springy. You dip the tip into the ink, twisting it gently against the side of the well to remove the excess and bring the hairs to a perfect point. The ink clings to the brush in a dark, glossy bead that trembles slightly with your pulse. You hold the brush poised above the scroll for a moment, your wrist straight, your breathing slow, and then you touch the tip to the paper. The first stroke is a simple horizontal line, a single sweep of the brush from left to right. The ink flows from the hair onto the paper in a smooth, dark ribbon, and the paper drinks it in, the line settling into the fibers with a permanence that will last for centuries. You watch the stroke dry as you lift the brush, the wet shine fading to a matte black, and then you make the next stroke, a vertical line that crosses the first at its center. The character forms under your hand, stroke by stroke, each one a small discipline of angle and pressure and release. You are copying the Heart Sutra, the short text that speaks of emptiness and form, of the wisdom that goes beyond wisdom. You have copied it many times before, on this scroll and on others, and the characters are known to your hand in a way that bypasses thought. Your eyes read the source text, a worn copy printed from a woodblock that lies open on a small stand to your left, but your hand moves without conscious direction, the brush rising and falling, dipping and turning, writing characters that you could write in darkness, in sleep, in the deep stillness of a meditation hall. The sound of the brush on the paper is the quietest sound in the temple. It is a soft whisk, a feather touch of wet hair on dry fiber, so faint that you hear it only because your ear is close to the work. The rain outside is louder, the candle flame's soft hiss is louder, even your own breathing is louder, but the brush sound is the one that holds your attention, the thread that you follow through the labyrinth of the text. You write 3 columns of characters, each column containing 17 characters, each character built of 5 or 6 or 7 strokes that follow a strict order handed down from the ancient masters. The work is slow and exact. You do not hurry because hurry would spoil the balance of the strokes, and because there is no reason to hurry, no destination waiting at the end of the scroll, no reward beyond the work itself. The candle flame bends to the left as a draft moves through the library, and you pause to shield it with your hand until it steadies. Then continue the column where you left off. After the 3rd column, you set the brush down on the mountain-shaped rest and flex your fingers. The muscles of your hand are warm from the small, precise movements, and a faint ache has begun in the joint of your thumb, the ache that comes from holding the brush in the proper grip. You pick up the teacup and drink, the liquid now lukewarm but still fragrant, still carrying the green taste of the distant terraces. The cup is half empty. You set it down and turn back to the scroll. You roll the scroll forward by 1 column, turning the right-hand roller until the finished text disappears and a fresh band of blank paper appears under the deer-shaped weight. The blankness of the new column is like a held breath, a space of pure potential, and you look at it for a moment before lifting the brush again. The first stroke on fresh paper is always the most careful, the one that sets the tone for all the strokes that follow, and you make it with particular attention, watching the ink flow from the brush tip, watching the line establish itself on the pale mulberry surface. The candle burns down as you work. The flame is now lower than when you began, the wick developing a small charred cap that makes the light flicker. You pause after the 5th column and lift the candle snuffer, a small iron cone on a long handle, but you do not snuff the flame. Instead, you use the tiny scissors that hang from the candle stand to trim the wick, snipping off the charred cap so that the flame burns cleanly again. The trimmed bit of wick falls into the clay dish with a tiny click, and the light steadies, brightening the desk by a small measure. You return to the brush. The 6th column begins with the character for form, a complex shape of 9 strokes that requires the brush to turn and pivot in precise ways. You make the first stroke, the second, the third, and then you pause because the ink on the brush has grown thin, the strokes becoming pale and dry. You dip the brush again, twisting it in the inkwell to gather a fresh load, and you continue the character, watching the darkness return to the line. The seventh stroke is a sharp hook that you execute with a flick of the wrist, a motion that took you years to learn and now feels as natural as breathing. The seventh column, the eighth. The text of the sutra moves through its familiar phrases, the words that have been recited in temples across the world for more than 1,000 years. You do not think about the meaning as you write, but the meaning is there, underneath the strokes, a quiet presence that shapes the work without announcing itself. The brush moves, the ink flows, the candle burns, the rain falls, and the library holds you in its paper-scented darkness like a seed held in a dry pod. By the 10th column, your eyes have grown slightly tired, a gentle fatigue that is not unpleasant, but simply a signal that the work has continued for some time. You set the brush down and sit back on your heels, stretching your spine with a slow arch. The candle has burned down by the width of 2 fingers, and the pool of wax at its base has grown, a soft white puddle that will harden into a smooth mound by morning. The teacup is empty now, a few dark leaves clinging to the bottom, and you set it aside to be washed later. You look at the scroll, at the 10 fresh columns of characters that gleam black on the pale paper. The strokes are even and balanced, the spacing regular, the overall effect one of quiet order. You are not proud of the work exactly, but you are satisfied in the way that a stone is satisfied to sit where it sits, doing what it does. The scroll will be finished eventually, after many more nights of copying, and it will join the others in the library, rolled and tied with a silk cord, waiting for a reader who may come next month or next year, or long after you are gone. You rise from the cushion and walk to the shelf where the finished scrolls are stored. There are dozens of them, each one a copy of a sutra or a commentary or a record of the temple's history, each one written by the hands of monks who knelt at this same desk, trimmed this same candle, listened to this same rain. You touch the end of one scroll, feeling the smooth wood of the roller, and you think of the chain of hands reaching backward through time, each one passing the brush to the next. Then you return to the desk, kneel once more, and lift the brush for the final column of the night. The 11th column is a short one, only 12 characters, a closing phrase that completes the section you began many evenings ago. You write it with particular care, each stroke deliberate, each character given its full due, and when the last stroke is complete, you set the brush down with a sense of quiet completion. The scroll is not finished, but this part of it is, and that is enough for tonight. You clean the brush with water from the dropper, working the ink out of the hairs with gentle fingers until the water runs clear. You wipe the inkstone with a scrap of cloth, removing the dried ink from the well. You roll the scroll forward slightly so that the fresh writing is protected inside the roll, and you place the deer weights on top of the rolled portion to hold it secure. The library is returned to its orderly state, ready for the next night, the next candle, the next slow column of characters. You take the candle in its iron stand and carry it to the door, sliding the panel open with one hand. The corridor lantern outside still burns, its flame steady, and the rain still drums on the roof tiles overhead. You step into the passage and slide the door closed behind you, the library returning to darkness, the scrolls waiting in their patient rows for the next hand that will unroll them. The candle flame bends in the corridor draught, and you cup your hand around it as you walk, carrying the small light through the long dark temple toward whatever small task comes next. The candle in its iron stand is still warm in your hand as you walk the covered passage from the library back toward the center of the temple. The flame bends and sways with the movement of your body, a small golden dancer that casts shifting shadows on the stone walls and the closed shutters. Your robe is still damp from the earlier walk through the courtyard, but it has dried somewhat in the warmth of the library, and now it hangs on your shoulders with a comfortable weight. The tea you drank has left a faint green taste on your tongue, and the motion of the brush still lives in the muscles of your right hand, a tiny echo of each stroke repeating itself in memory. You are tired but not sleepy, the kind of tiredness that opens the senses rather than closing them, and the thought of climbing the bell tower steps comes to you not as a decision, but as a quiet inclination, a pull toward the high place where the wind and the mist meet the temple's oldest voice. You stop at the kitchen alcove to return the candle stand to its shelf. The stove is nearly cold now, the coals reduced to a fine grey ash that shifts softly when you pass your hand over the stove opening to feel for any remaining heat. There is none, or almost none, just the faintest warmth that could be memory. You set the candle stand on the shelf, its iron base clicking against the wood, and you leave the candle stub in its cup for the morning. Then you take the hooded lantern from its peg once more, adjusting the wick to a low flame that will last the climb and the return. The rear terrace lies at the back of the temple, beyond the north passage in the meditation hall, a flat space of stone that was cut from the mountain slope when the temple was first built. To reach it, you must walk the length of the north passage and pass through a narrow doorway set into the back wall, a doorway that has no door but only a heavy curtain of oiled canvas that hangs from iron rings. You push the curtain aside, the canvas stiff and cool under your hand, and you step onto the rear terrace for the first time this night. The terrace is open to the sky. No roof covers it, and the rain falls here without interruption, striking the flagstones with a sound that is louder and sharper than anywhere else in the temple. The stones are old, some of them cracked and patched with smaller stones, and their surfaces are dark with water and mottled with the pale green of ancient lichen. You stand for a moment just beyond the curtain, letting the rain fall on your head and shoulders, feeling the drops run down your shaved scalp and behind your ears. The hooded lantern in your hand hisses as a drop of water strikes the hot iron cap, but the flame within stays steady, protected by the glass and the deep hood. The terrace is not large. It extends perhaps 15 paces from the back wall to the edge of the mountain, where a low stone railing marks the boundary between the temple and the drop into the gorge. Beyond the railing, there is nothing but darkness and mist, a vast empty space that feels bottomless, though you know the valley floor lies far below. The mist rises from the gorge in slow coils, white against the black air, lit faintly by the lantern's beam as it drifts past. The wind moves the mist in unpredictable ways, now pushing a thick bank against the railing, now pulling it apart into thin streamers that dissolve into the rain. You walk across the terrace toward the bell tower, your steps careful on the slick stones. The tower rises from the northeast corner, a square structure of dark wood and grey tiles that stands 3 stories high, taller than any other part of the temple. Its walls are simple, built of thick planks fitted together without ornament, and its roof is a 4-sided pyramid of curved tiles that sweep upward to a single point. A narrow stair is attached to the outside of the tower, a series of wooden steps that climb in switchback fashion from the terrace to the bell chamber at the top, covered by a narrow roof that sheds rain onto the steps themselves in a constant trickle. You reach the base of the tower and pause, looking up. The tower disappears into the darkness above the reach of your lantern beam, its upper portions invisible except as a deeper black against the black sky. The sound of the rain is different here, a higher drumming on the steep roof tiles, a steady rush of water spilling from the corner spouts onto the terrace stones. The wind is stronger too, pressing against your robe and tugging at the lantern in your hand, and you can hear the old timbers of the tower groaning softly as they shift against the pressure, a deep, quiet sound like the voice of an old person settling into sleep. You begin to climb. The stairs are narrow, each tread worn into a shallow curve by centuries of feet, and they are slick with rain despite the small roof that covers them. You place your hand on the wooden rail that runs along the outer edge, the wood rough and wet under your palm, and you climb one step at a time, not hurrying, feeling the rise of your knee and the push of your foot with each movement. The lantern swings from your other hand, its beam sliding up the wall of the tower, illuminating the dark planks and the iron nails that hold them, the small spiders that have built their webs in the angle between the wall and the stair roof. The first switchback brings you to a small landing where the stair turns back on itself. You pause there, not because you need rest, but because the view over the terrace has changed with the height. You can see the full extent of the rear terrace now, the dark rectangle of wet stone, the low railing at the edge, the curtained doorway that leads back into the temple. A single line of light from the corridor lanterns leaks through the gap above the curtain, a thin gold thread that seems very far away. You watch it for a moment, then turn and continue climbing. The second flight of stairs is steeper than the first, the rises higher, the treads narrower. The rain falls harder here because the protective roof is smaller, just a narrow strip of tiles that does not quite cover the full width of the stairs, and the drops strike your left shoulder in a steady patter. You shift the lantern to your other hand so that your body can block the worst of the wet, and you continue upward. You're breathing slightly deeper now, your legs beginning to feel the effort of the climb. The tower wall beside you vibrates faintly with the wind, a low hum that you can feel through the railing more than hear. At the second switchback you pause again and turn to look outward, away from the tower into the open darkness of the valley. The terrace and the temple are below you now, their shapes blurred by the rain and the mist, their few lights reduced to scattered points of gold that seem to float in the blackness without connection to any solid thing. Beyond them, the valley stretches away into invisibility, a great absence that you know is filled with forests and streams, and the long winding path that pilgrims climb. But tonight it is only mist and shadow, and the sound of water falling on infinite leaves. The third flight of stairs brings you to the bell chamber. The stairs end at a narrow wooden platform that runs around 3 sides of the tower's top level, and a low door opens into the chamber itself. The door is a simple wooden panel on iron hinges, closed but not latched, and you push it open with the flat of your hand. The hinges turn without sound because you oiled them yourself at the start of the rainy season, a small task that now rewards you with silence. You step into the bell chamber, and the space opens around you. The chamber is a square room, perhaps 8 paces across, its walls formed by the thick timbers of the tower frame, its ceiling the underside of the steep pyramid roof. The rain drums directly on the tiles above you, the sound loud and close, filling the chamber like the inside of a drum. The wind passes through the narrow gaps between the timbers, making a low whistling sound that rises and falls with the gusts, and in the center of the chamber hangs the bell. The bell is old. It was cast in the valley foundry long before the temple was built, brought up the mountain on the backs of many monks, and hung here with ropes that have been replaced 100 times over the centuries. It is made of bronze, its surface a dark green-brown patina that shows streaks of lighter metal where the clapper has struck over the years. Its shape is a graceful curve, wide at the mouth and tapering toward the crown, and it hangs from a massive wooden beam that spans the full width of the chamber. The beam is a single piece of cypress, its surface darkened and polished by age, its ends resting in iron brackets bolted to the tower frame. You set the lantern on the small shelf near the door, a shelf that holds a clay pot of oil and a spare rope coiled neatly. The lantern's beam falls across the bell, making the bronze gleam dully, and you approach the great metal shape with the same quiet respect you would show an elder. The bell does not speak tonight, but it could. Its voice is the deepest sound the mountain knows, a tone that rolls down the valleys and across the ridges, calling the monks to meditation, marking the hours, announcing the arrival of guests. You have heard that voice many times, and you will hear it again, but tonight the bell is silent, and your task is simply to tend to it. You begin with the beam. The moisture that collects on the wooden surfaces is the enemy of all things in a mountain temple, and the bell beam is no exception. You take the dry cloth that hangs from a peg near the shelf, a square of soft cotton that you replaced only last week, and you raise your hand to the beam's underside. The wood is cool and slightly damp as you expected, and you wipe it with long, slow strokes, moving from the center outward toward the iron brackets. The cloth darkens as it absorbs the moisture, and you turn it to a dry side, continuing your work until the entire underside of the beam feels dry under your palm. The iron brackets are next. These are heavy pieces of forged iron, each one bolted to the tower frame with 3 large bolts. You check each bolt with a touch of your fingers, feeling for any looseness or rust. The bolts are tight, their threads solid in the wood, and the brackets show only a thin surface rust that is normal for the season and nothing to worry about. You wipe them with an oily rag from the shelf, a rag that smells faintly of camellia, and the iron darkens under the oil, protected against the damp for another week. Now you turn your attention to the ropes. 2 ropes hang from the bell's crown, one thick and one thin. The thick rope is the main rope, the one that swings the bell, and it runs from the crown down through a hole in the floor to the ringing platform on the second level. The thin rope is the steadying line, a secondary support that keeps the bell from twisting in the wind. You take the thick rope in your hands, feeling the hemp fibers rough against your palms, and you run your hands along its length from the crown down to where it disappears through the floor. The rope is dry and sound, its fibers still springy, its twist still tight. You test it with a gentle pull, and it holds firm, the bell above you swaying by a hair's breadth, but not swinging, the clapper inside remaining still. The thin rope shows a little fraying where it passes through the iron ring at the crown. You untie the frayed end, cut away the damaged section with a small knife from your belt, and retie the rope with a simple knot that you have tied 1,000 times before, a knot that tightens under tension and never slips. The new end is clean and strong, and you test it with the same gentle pull, satisfied when it holds without stretching. The rope is now ready for another season of wind and weather. You check the clapper next, the heavy iron rod that hangs inside the bell. To reach it, you must duck slightly under the bell's mouth, your head and shoulders entering the dark space inside the bronze curve. The air inside the bell smells of old metal and dry dust, a scent that is ancient and clean. You touch the clapper with your finger, feeling the smooth iron, the slight rounding at the tip where it has struck the bell's inner wall. It is secure in its suspension, the leather straps that hold it still supple, despite their age. You duck back out, your head brushing the bell's rim with a soft clink that dies instantly into the rain sound. The floor of the bell chamber is dusty, and you sweep it with a small broom that stands in the corner, pushing the dust and a few dead insects into a pile near the door. You scoop the pile into a cloth and fold it away to be emptied in the morning. Then you stand in the center of the chamber, under the bell, and you let your hands rest at your sides while you listen to the rain and the wind and the deep silence of the bell above you. After a time, you walk to the door and step out onto the viewing platform that wraps around the tower's top. The platform is narrow, just wide enough for one person to stand, with a wooden railing at waist height. The rain falls on the small roof that covers this platform, but the wind drives a fine spray into your face, cool and clean. You stand at the railing and look out over the valley, and the world below you is a sea of mist and darkness. The mist moves in slow waves, rising and falling, parting to reveal deeper darknesses that are ridges or clouds or simply more mist. The rain falls into it, disappearing without sound, swallowed by the white depths. Far below, you can hear the river that runs along the valley floor, a faint rushing that is constant and low, like the breathing of the mountain itself. The forest that covers the slopes is invisible, but you know it is there because you can smell it. The wet pine and the damp earth and the green scent of living things all rising on the updrafts that carry the mist past the tower. You stand at the railing for a long time, your hands resting on the wet wood, your face lifted to the wind. The cold air clears the last tiredness from your eyes, and your breathing becomes slow and deep, matching the rhythm of the mist's movement. You think of the valley below, the path that winds through it, the small villages that you have never visited, the people sleeping in their houses with the rain on their roofs, just as it drums on yours. You think of the long chain of monks who have stood in this very spot, feeling this same wind, watching this same mist, their lives as quiet and steady as the bell that hangs behind you. The lantern on the shelf inside the chamber burns with a small, steady flame. You turn from the railing, step back inside, and take the lantern in your hand. The bell chamber is as you found it, the beam dry, the rope sound, the floor swept clean. You close the door gently and begin the slow descent down the narrow stairs, your hand on the rail, your feet finding each worn tread with the memory of the climb upward still fresh in your muscles. The rain continues to fall, the wind continues to blow, and the temple waits below you, its few lights burning steadily, its roofs shedding water into the stone channels, its walls holding back the storm with the patient strength of wood and stone and centuries of care. The descent from the bell tower takes longer than the climb, as descents always do when the stairs are wet and the wind is pushing at your back. You move one step at a time, your hand sliding along the wooden rail, the hooded lantern throwing its beam onto the treads before you. The rain continues to fall on the narrow roof above the stairs, and the water that has collected on the tiles finds its way down in a steady trickle that drips onto your shoulder at each switchback. You do not hurry. The tower has given you a gift of stillness, a quiet that has settled into your chest like a stone settling into a stream bed, and you carry it with you as you descend. The rear terrace greets you at the bottom of the stairs, its flagstones still glistening under the rain, the mist from the valley still drifting in slow coils across the railing. You cross the terrace and push through the oiled canvas curtain, stepping back into the covered north passage. The sound of the storm changes immediately, the open roar of the terrace giving way to the muffled drumming of the roof, and your ears adjust with a small pop that makes the world seem briefly louder before it settles. You stand in the passage for a moment, letting the rainwater drip from your robe onto the stones, and then you turn left, walking not toward the kitchen or the main hall, but toward the library, the same room you left not so long ago. The library door slides open under your hand with the same smooth motion, the same soft thump as it settles into its frame. The air inside is cooler than you remember, or perhaps your body has grown cooler from standing in the wind at the top of the tower, and you feel the difference on your cheeks and the tips of your ears. The candle you left in its iron stand has burned out while you were away. The wick, a black curl in a pool of hardened wax, and the library is dark except for the beam of your lantern and the thin line of corridor light that seeps through the gap above the door. You set the lantern on the desk where the candle stand sits, and you take a fresh candle from the wooden box on the shelf, pressing it into the iron cup. You light it from the lantern's flame with a pine splinter, and the new flame springs up, bright and eager, as if glad to be born. The library is a room you know in your bones. You have spent countless hours here, copying sutras at the low desk, reading old commentaries by candlelight, mending torn pages with rice paste and thin paper. But tonight your task is different. The deep night has arrived, the hour when the world outside is at its darkest and the temple settles into its most profound quiet. And in this hour you have a simple duty: to walk the shelves, to touch the books, to breathe the scent of old paper and ink, and to let the library tell you that it is well. You begin at the eastern wall, where the oldest volumes are kept. These are the stitched books, not scrolls, but bound codices of thick paper sewn together with hemp thread along one edge, their covers made of dark blue cloth wrapped around boards of thin cedar. They sit upright on the shelves, leaning against one another like old friends sharing a bench, their spines marked with brush-written titles that have faded over the years to a pale brown. You reach out and touch the spine of the first book, your finger tracing the characters that name it, a commentary on the Lotus Sutra, written by a monk whose name you do not recognize, a name that has been forgotten everywhere except on this room, on this mountain. You lift the book from the shelf, feeling the weight of it, the slight give of the covers, the dry rustle of the pages as they settle. The cloth cover is cool and faintly rough under your fingers, and you open the book to a page near the middle. The paper is a pale cream color, darkened at the edges from age and exposure, and the characters are written in a steady hand, each stroke even and calm. You read a few lines without really reading, letting your eyes pass over the shapes, and then you close the book and return it to its place on the shelf. The book tilts against its neighbor and holds, a small act of leaning that will continue for years. The next shelf holds more stitched books, dozens of them, a library within a library. You walk slowly along the eastern wall, your lantern in one hand, your other hand brushing the spines as you pass. Some of the books are thick, their pages swollen with the moisture of centuries, and some are thin, only a few sheets of paper bound together with a single thread. Each one contains a piece of the Dharma, a record of a teaching, a commentary on a commentary, a letter from a master to a student, a poem written in the margin by a monk who has long since become dust. You do not count the books, but your hands note them, each spine a familiar shape, each absence of a book, a small awareness that it has been moved to the reading desk or borrowed by another monk who lives in one of the hermitage huts on the lower slope. At the corner where the eastern wall meets the southern, you stop before a shelf that holds the rolled maps. These are not sutras but practical documents, maps of the mountain paths, drawings of the temple complex, diagrams of the drainage system, charts of the stars as seen from the bell tower at different seasons. You take one from its place, a map of the valley drawn on thick mulberry paper, the ink faded to a soft brown. You unroll it carefully, the paper crackling softly, and you study the lines that mark the streams and the ridges, the small squares that represent the villages, the dotted path that winds up from the valley floor to the temple gate. You have walked that path only a few times in your life, when you first arrived, and on the rare occasions when you have gone down to the market village for supplies. The path is long and steep, and in this weather it will be a river of mud and stones, impassable and empty. You roll the map again and return it to the shelf. The southern wall is the longest, and it holds the bulk of the scrolls. These are the sutra copies, the records of teachings, the histories of the temple, all stored in their wooden rollers and tied with silk cords. The scrolls lie flat on the shelves, stacked in rows of 5 or 6, and their ends are marked with small paper tags that name their contents. You walk along the southern wall, your lantern beam illuminating the tags one by one. Heart Sutra, Diamond Sutra, Platform Sutra, record of the temple's founding, record of the first abbot, record of the great storm of the 4th year. You pause at that last scroll, remembering the story it contains, a storm that lasted for 11 days, a roof that collapsed, a monk who spent 3 nights in the bell tower tying ropes in the wind. That storm was long ago, and the roof was rebuilt, and tonight's storm is gentle by comparison, a long soft rain that will not tear down anything that was built with care. You continue your walk, passing the shelves where the wooden printing blocks are stored. These blocks are thick planks of pear wood, each one carved in reverse with a page of text, the characters standing out in sharp relief. They are stacked on their sides, separated by sheets of paper to keep the carved surfaces from touching, and they smell of wood and ink and the faint sweetness of the oil that was used to clean them. You touch the carved surface of the top block, feeling the ridges of the characters under your fingertip, the small precise cuts that a carver made many years ago. The block is ready, waiting for the next printing, the next copy, the next reader. The dust has gathered on the shelves since you last cleaned them, a fine grey powder that settles on every surface, no matter how often you wipe it away. You take a dry cloth from the shelf near the door and you begin to dust the scrolls, starting at the eastern end of the southern wall and working your way slowly toward the west. The cloth moves over the wooden rollers and the paper tags, lifting the dust into the air where it swirls in the lantern beam like tiny stars. You do not hurry the dusting. Each scroll receives the same attention, the same gentle wipe, the same moment of your care, and as you work, you feel the quiet satisfaction that comes from tending things that cannot tend themselves. The dusting takes you along the full length of the southern wall, around the corner to the short western wall where the fewest books are kept, and then to the northern wall where the newer volumes sit, the ones that have been added in your lifetime. These are books you've helped to make, scrolls you've copied, records you have written. You touch them with a particular gentleness, not because they are more valuable than the old ones, but because they are still finding their place among the centuries, still settling into the long shelf of the temple's memory. At the northern wall, you pause before a shelf that holds a single small book, a book you know better than any other. It is the temple's daily record, a simple ledger of weather and tasks and visitors and supplies, and you have written in it every evening since you took on the duty of the gatekeeper. You open it to the current page, the paper fresh and white, the ink of your last entry still dark. The entry reads simply, "Rain began at evening, shutters closed, lanterns lit." You will add more before you sleep, a few lines about the bell tower and the storehouse and the tea, and then you will close the book and return it to its shelf until tomorrow. You turn from the shelves and walk to the bench that sits against the western wall, a simple wooden bench with a woven seat that has been patched in 3 places. You sit down, placing the lantern on the floor beside you, and you let your hands rest on your thighs while you breathe the library's air. The scent is complex and deep: old paper, dry ink, cedar wood, beeswax, a trace of the camellia oil from the lantern, a trace of the rain that has seeped into the walls over the centuries, until the stone itself seems to exhale moisture. It is the scent of the temple's mind, the stored knowledge of 1,000 monks, and you breathe it in with a quiet gratitude that you are here, that you are part of this, that the storm outside cannot touch the words inside. The wind rattles the loose shutter somewhere in the temple, a sound you've been hearing all night, a sound you already wedged tight with a scrap of wood earlier in the evening. The wedge has loosened again, or perhaps the wind has found a new shutter, a new gap, a new way to make its presence known. You rise from the bench and walk to the door, sliding it open and stepping into the corridor. The sound of the rattling shutter is clearer here, a sharp clatter that echoes down the passage, and you follow it to the eastern corridor where the 5th lantern burns with its greenish glass. The shutter in question is the one beside the meditation hall door, and you see that the wedge has indeed shifted, the wind having worked it loose over hours of patient pushing. You press the wedge back into place with a firm push of your thumb, and the rattling stops. The silence that follows is immediate and deep, and you stand there for a moment, your hand still on the shutter, feeling the wind push against the outside of the wood. The shutter holds. The wedge holds. You return to the library, sliding the door closed behind you, and you sit down on the bench once more. The candle on the desk has burned down by another finger's width. The night is moving toward its deepest point, the hour when even the animals in their dens are still, when the mist in the valley is at its thickest, when the rain seems to fall with a gentler sound because the world has settled so completely into its rhythm. You close your eyes, not to sleep, but to listen, and the library speaks to you in its small voices, the tick of the cooling candle wax, the soft creak of the roof timbers, the distant drumming of the rain, the even more distant rush of the river in the valley. These sounds blend together into a single presence, and you sit within it, still and quiet, a guardian of books and scrolls and the long memory of the mountain. The library settles behind you as you slide the door closed, its books and scrolls returning to their patient darkness. The candle on the desk has been extinguished, with a gentle pinch of your fingers, the thin trail of smoke rising and dissipating into the air, and the hooded lantern is once again in your hand, its flame now burning low, because the oil has begun to run shallow. You stand in the eastern corridor, the long straight passage where 3 lanterns burn in their steady row, and you feel the deep quiet of the night pressing against the temple from all sides. The rain continues, but it has softened in the last hour, its drumming on the tiles now a gentle roar rather than a pounding, as if the storm itself has grown tired and is settling towards sleep. You have no task now. The shutters are closed and checked, the gate is barred, the lanterns are lit, the tea is steeped and drunk, the storehouse is inspected, the sutra is copied, the bell tower is visited, the library is dusted. Every duty that the evening asked of you has been completed, and yet the night is not over. There is a stretch of time between the last task and the first grey light of dawn that belongs to no particular purpose, a space that is neither waking nor sleeping, and you have learned over the years to enter this space without resistance, to let it hold you as the temple holds the mountain. You walk slowly along the eastern corridor, your slippers brushing the wooden planks with a sound so soft it barely reaches your own ears. You pass the 4th lantern, the 3rd, the 2nd, each one burning steadily, their oil levels all still sufficient for the hours that remain. You turn the corner into the south passage, the one you walked at the very beginning of the evening, when the rain was just starting and the shutters were still open to the fading light. That seems a very long time ago now, though you know it has only been a few hours, a single evening span measured by the burning of oil and the falling of water. You stop in the middle of the south passage, midway between the corner and the main hall doors. This is the spot you were looking for without knowing you were looking for it, the place where the corridor widens slightly to accommodate a small wooden stool that sits against the inner wall. The stool is a humble thing, 3 legs and a shaped seat made from a single piece of cedar by a monk who lived here long ago. Its surface is polished by decades of use, dark with age and the oils of many hands, and it fits the human body in the way that only things made by hand can fit. You have sat on this stool many times before, on many nights like this one, and it has become a kind of friend, a simple presence that asks nothing and gives everything. You sit down on the stool, placing the lantern on the flagstones beside you, and you fold your hands inside your sleeves. The position is natural and comfortable, your spine straight but not rigid, your shoulders relaxed, your head slightly bowed so that your gaze falls on the stones at your feet. The lantern's beam spills across the passage floor, illuminating the dark flagstones and the edge of the outer wall, but most of the corridor remains in shadow, a soft darkness that is not frightening but protective, like a blanket drawn up to the chin. The stillness begins to gather around you. At first your body is still settling, the small muscles of your back and legs adjusting to the shape of the stool, your breathing finding its rhythm, your thoughts slowing from the gentle activity of walking to the deeper quiet of sitting. But as the moments pass, one after another, each one identical to the one before, the settling deepens into something more profound. Your body becomes as still as the stones beneath you, and your breathing becomes so slow and even that you can barely feel the air moving in and out of your nostrils. Your thoughts, which have been moving all evening with the gentle current of tasks and observations, begin to slow as well, becoming less like a stream and more like a pool, the surface smooth and reflective. The sounds of the temple come to you one by one, each one distinct and clear. The rain on the roof is the loudest, a steady hush that fills the corridor from end to end. But within that hush you can hear many smaller sounds. There is the drip of water from a loose tile somewhere near the main hall, a regular tap that marks time without urgency. There is the gurgle of the drainage channel beneath the flagstones, a low liquid sound that rises and falls with the wind. There is the creak of a timber somewhere in the roof, the wood settling against its neighbor as the temperature drops by another small degree. There is the faint hiss of the lantern wick beside you, the sound of oil being drawn up into the flame, the smallest possible whisper of consumption. You listen to these sounds without naming them, without thinking about them, without even listening in the way that listening is usually done. The sounds simply enter your ears and pass through you, leaving no trace. The rain is not rain. It is only sound. The drip is only a tap in the darkness. The creak is not a timber settling, it is only a brief voice that speaks and falls silent. You sit at the center of all these sounds, and the boundary between yourself and the temple begins to soften, to blur, until you are not a monk sitting on a stool, but a part of the temple itself, as still and as patient as the stones and the wood and the bronze lanterns. Time passes in the way it passes in deep stillness, not as a line, but as a circle. You do not know how long you have been sitting, and you do not need to know. The oil in the lantern burns down by a small measure. The rain softens a little more, its drumming now a gentle patter. The wind that has been blowing all evening eases, and the mist in the valley rises higher, spilling over the railing of the rear terrace and drifting through the open spaces between the buildings. A thin tendril of mist even finds its way into the south passage, a white curl that moves slowly through the darkness, catching the lantern light for a moment before dissolving into the shadows. Your mind, now very quiet, drifts without direction. Images come and go like the mist. The face of the Buddha image in the main hall, the grain of the wood on the library desk, the curve of the bell in its chamber, the steam rising from the tea kettle in the kitchen. These images are not memories exactly, not thoughts in the usual sense, but more like echoes, the afterglow of things you have seen and touched and tended during the long evening. They pass through your awareness without attachment, each one arriving and departing with the same gentle indifference, and you let them come and go as you let the sounds come and go. The stool beneath you is warm now, your body heat having seeped into the cedar wood. Your hands inside your sleeves are warm too, the fingers curled loosely, the thumbs resting against the palms. You feel the pulse in your wrists, a slow steady beat that matches the drip of the water and the rhythm of the rain. Your eyelids are heavy, not with sleep, but with a profound restfulness, the kind of rest that comes when the body is completely still and the mind is completely quiet and there is nowhere to go and nothing to do. You let your eyes close, and the darkness behind your eyelids is the same as the darkness of the corridor, a soft black that holds you without pressure. The temple around you is alive in its own quiet way. The lanterns burn on their hooks. The incense smolders in its bronze tripod. The scrolls rest on their shelves. The bell hangs in its tower. The tea leaves sit in their caddy. The grain sacks stand in the storehouse. All these things exist. All these things are held in the great quiet of the night, and you exist among them, a monk on a stool, a guardian at his post, a small part of a larger whole that stretches backward through centuries and forward into centuries yet to come. A small sound reaches you through the stillness, a sound that is different from the others. It is the call of a night bird somewhere in the forest below the eastern wall, a single low note that rises and falls and then is silent. The bird calls again, closer this time, or perhaps the wind has carried the sound more clearly. You open your eyes, not because the bird needs your attention, but because the sound has reminded you that the world beyond the temple still exists, that the forest is full of living things sheltering from the rain, that the mountain is vast and old and indifferent to the small concerns of a single night. You rise from the stool, moving slowly, your body unfolding from its stillness with the same care you would use to unroll an old scroll. Your legs are stiff, but not painfully so, and you stand for a moment in the corridor, letting the blood return to your feet. The lantern is still burning, its flame low but steady, and you bend to pick it up, your fingers closing around the warm iron handle. The stool remains behind you, empty and waiting, as it has waited for decades and will wait for decades more. You do not walk far. The covered passage is long, and there are many places to sit, many stools and benches and thresholds that have been shaped by the sitting of many monks. You choose a different spot this time, a low bench near the corner where the south passage meets the west, a bench that sits beneath a window you closed hours ago. The shutter is still secure, the latch still holding, and the sound of the rain is closer here, just on the other side of the wood. You sit down, placing the lantern beside you, and you fold your hands once more inside your sleeves. The stillness returns more quickly this time, as if it has been waiting for you. Your breathing slows, your thoughts settle, your body becomes heavy and warm. The rain on the shutter is a light tapping now, the storm having spent its greatest energy on the earlier hours, and the wind has dropped to a gentle breeze that barely stirs the mist. The night is deep and full, the deepest part of the night, the hour when the world holds its breath and the darkness is at its most complete. You sit in this darkness and you let the time pass. The lantern burns on. The rain taps on the shutter. The mist drifts through the gaps in the roof. The temple stands on its shelf of rock, held by the mountain, and you sit on your bench, held by the temple, and the night moves slowly, silently, peacefully, toward the distant shore of dawn. The deep stillness of the night has passed its peak and begun its slow descent toward morning. You cannot see this descent and you cannot hear it, but you feel it in the way the air changes, the subtle shift in temperature and weight that tells you the darkness has reached its fullest depth and is now thinning, molecule by molecule, toward the first hint of grey. You have been sitting on the low bench near the west passage for a time you cannot measure. Your hands folded, your breathing slow, the lantern burning beside you with a flame that has grown small and blue at its base. The rain has softened to a fine drizzle, the kind of rain that seems to hang in the air as much as fall through it, and the wind has dropped to an occasional sigh that barely stirs the mist. You rise from the bench, your body moving with the slow heaviness that comes from long stillness. The lantern is light in your hand now, the oil reservoir nearly empty, and you know that it will burn for perhaps another hour before the wick begins to drink air instead of fuel. That hour is enough for what remains of the night, enough for the final circuit, enough for the last small tasks that will carry the temple across the threshold from darkness into dawn. The first task is the kettle. You have not made fresh tea since the early evening, and your throat is dry from the hours of quiet breathing in the cool, damp air. You walk along the west passage toward the kitchen alcove, passing the gatehouse where your evening began, passing the first lantern you lit so many hours ago, its flame now burning low and steady, its oil still holding. The kitchen is dark when you arrive. the stove completely cold, the ashes grey and soft. You set the lantern on the preparation table and kneel before the stove, brushing the old ashes into the small iron tray that slides out from the base. The ashes fall silently, a fine grey snow that settles into the tray without dusting the air. You build a new fire with the same slow care you used earlier, though the motions are simpler now because you need only a small flame, enough to warm the water, but not to boil it for long. The tinderbox opens, the flint strikes, the sparks fall into the moss, and the small flame appears as if by habit. You feed it with twigs, then a single larger stick, and the fire wakes in the stove with a soft crackle. The kettle is still half full from earlier, the water cool but not cold, and you set it on the stove top to warm. While it heats, you rinse the teapot and the cup you used before, pouring the old leaves into a clay bowl that will be emptied into the garden in the morning, and you measure fresh leaves from the caddy into the pot. The leaves are cool and fragrant, their scent rising as they tumble into the warm ceramic. The water heats quickly this time, the small fire doing its work without drama, and soon the kettle begins its quiet song, the water trembling against the iron walls. You do not wait for a full boil, but lift the kettle when the first bubbles rise, pouring the hot water over the fresh leaves in a slow spiral. The steam rises around your face, clean and green, and you cover the pot with its cloth to steep. The tea will be ready by the time you return from your circuit, warm and waiting, a small comfort for the last hour of the night. You take the lantern and leave the kitchen, walking now along the eastern corridor toward the main hall. The temple is at its quietest in this hour. The rain so soft that you can hear your own footsteps and the rustle of your robe and the faint hiss of the lantern wick. The corridor lanterns still burn in their row, their flames small but steady, and you pause at each one as you pass. The first lantern needs nothing, its oil still deep, its wick trimmed. The second is the same. The third has a small spider web stretching from its handle to the beam, the same web you noticed earlier, and you see that the spider has returned, a tiny dark shape sitting at the center of its wheel. You leave it undisturbed. The fourth lantern, the one with the greenish glass, has a low oil level, and you make a note to refill it in the morning when the light is better and the oil bottle is easier to see. The main hall doors are closed as you left them, but the lantern inside still burns, its light a warm glow that seeps through the gaps around the frame. You push open the right-hand door, the wood cool under your palm, and you step inside. The hall is exactly as it was, the Buddha images gazing, the incense burner sending up its thin line of smoke, the lantern burning steadily on the floor. The incense stick has burned down to a stub no longer than your thumb, and the ash pile beneath it is a perfect grey cone. You kneel before the altar, touching your forehead briefly to the cool stone, a gesture that is not prayer, but acknowledgement, a silent greeting to the images that have kept their vigil through the night. Then you rise and check the lantern, adding a small measure of oil from the clay bottle, watching the golden liquid swirl into the reservoir. The wick drinks and the flame steadies, brightening by a small degree. The bowl you placed under the drip in the northwest corner is half full of water, the drip still falling into it with a steady tap. You empty the bowl into the drainage channel just outside the hall door, the water splashing softly onto the wet stones, and you replace the bowl under the drip. The leak has not worsened during the night, and the ceiling board shows no new staining. The roof will need a repair when the dry season comes, but for now, the bowl is enough, a simple solution to a simple problem. From the main hall, you walk to the south passage, the same passage where you sat on the wooden stool during the deep stillness. The stool is still there, empty and waiting, and you pass it without sitting, though your body remembers the rest it gave you. You check the shutters along the south wall as you walk, touching each latch with a brief press of your thumb. They are all secure, all holding against the damp, and the wind that rattled them earlier has dropped to nothing. The south wall is quiet now, the rain beyond it a soft whisper, the valley invisible, but for the mist that still rises from the gorge. The east wall is next, the long straight passage where the main gate waits. You walk to the gate and stand before it, the great cypress doors dark and solid in the lantern light. The horizontal beam still rests firm in its brackets. The side door is still bolted. You place your palm flat against the wood as you did earlier, and you feel the cool, dry surface, no longer vibrating with the storm's force but still and quiet. The gate has held through the night, as it has held through countless nights, and it will hold through the day that is coming. You turn from the gate and walk the length of the east passage, then turn north toward the rear terrace. The oiled canvas curtain is wet and heavy, and you push it aside to step out onto the terrace one final time. The rain is a fine mist now, so fine that it barely strikes the flagstones, hanging instead in the air like a cool breath. The mist from the valley has risen to fill the terrace, and you stand in a world of soft white, the lantern beam diffused into a glowing sphere that reaches only a few paces in any direction. The bell tower is invisible above you, but you know it is there. The bell dry and silent, the rope sound, the beam wiped clean. You stand in the mist for a long moment, breathing the cool, wet air, and then you turn and go back inside. The kitchen alcove is warm when you return, the fire still glowing in the stove, the teapot still wrapped in its cloth. You pour a cup of tea, the liquid a pale gold green, and you stand in the doorway of the alcove while you drink it, looking out into the courtyard. The rain has nearly stopped. The flagstones are wet and dark, reflecting the few lights that still burn, and the central well stands in its small roofed shelter, the water within it deep and cold and clean. The moss garden is a dark cushion, the pebbles are a river of wet stones. The drainage channel is still running with a thin stream of clear water. Everything is as it should be. The tea is warm and good, and it spreads through your chest and belly with a gentle heat. You drink it slowly, savoring the green taste, and when the cup is empty, you rinse it in the bucket of cistern water and set it upside down on the preparation table to dry. The teapot you leave as it is, still wrapped, still half full, for whoever wakes first and needs warmth. The final circuit of the night takes you back along every passage, past every lantern. The flames are all still burning, though some have grown low, their oil reservoirs nearly empty. You do not refill them now because the morning is close, and the first grey light will soon make lanterns unnecessary. You touch each lantern as you pass, a brief contact of your fingers on the warm iron, a silent thank you for their steady service through the long wet dark. You end your circuit at the gatehouse, the small room where the evening began. The wooden bench is still there, the shelf still holds the spare lantern and the coil of rope, the doorway still looks out onto the courtyard. You set your lantern on the shelf, its flame now a tiny blue teardrop that barely lights the glass, and you sit down on the bench with a long, slow exhale. Your body is tired now, a deep tiredness that is satisfying rather than draining, the kind of tiredness that comes from a night spent in quiet service. The sky outside the open doorway begins to change. At first the change is so subtle that you doubt it, a slight thinning of the blackness, a faint greyness that might be only your eyes adjusting. But then it strengthens, and you see the outline of the courtyard emerge from the darkness, the central well, the moss garden, the flagstones, the covered passage on the far side. The rain has stopped entirely now, and the mist is beginning to sink back into the valley, retreating like a tide. The air is fresh and cold and clean, washed by the hours of falling water, and it carries the scent of wet pine and damp earth and the first faint sweetness of the coming day. You rise from the bench and step to the doorway of the gatehouse. The sky above the eastern valley is a deep blue-grey, the clouds still thick but beginning to break apart, their edges softening. A single pale line of lighter grey marks the horizon where the sun will eventually rise, though the sun itself is still far below the mountains. The forest on the lower slopes is becoming visible, a dark green mass that emerges from the retreating mist like a painting coming into focus. You walk out into the courtyard, your slippers pressing into the wet flagstones, and you stand in the open air, looking up at the sky. The rain has passed. The storm has spent itself. The temple has weathered another night, and the morning is arriving with a quiet that is different from the quiet of the night, a quiet that is full of potential rather than rest. You make one last slow walk around the courtyard, checking the drainage channels, noting how the water has flowed cleanly and the cistern is full, and the garden is well watered. Then you return to the gatehouse and sit down on the bench, folding your hands inside your sleeves, and you wait for the first true light of dawn to touch the wet stone steps and the curved roof tiles and the silent bell in its tower. The night is over, the day's beginning, and you are still here, still watching, still guarding the mountain temple, as you have done through all the hours of the storm.